Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Growing up, my father was one of the most quietly conservative people you could ever hope to meet. He was exceedingly reserved, and never really said even boo to a goose. He was one of the general managers for an all-American bank, and was so incredibly successful, he had enabled the bank to make billions of dollars due to his ingenious ideas. But back in those days, let's just say people weren't rewarded so much financially, as they are indeed now, especially when they accomplish so much. Even so, at the time we enjoyed a very high standard of living, and never wanted for very much, although I would never have described us as wealthy. My mother had always been a stay-at-home mother, and had never been remotely ambitious. She had old-fashioned values, and thoroughly enjoyed spending time at home with her children, and taking care of the entire family. She believed there was no tougher job in the entire world than raising your younglings from the moment that they were born, and I believe she was right about that. She considered her job as a mother both a privilege and a pleasure, and wanted to enjoy every stage of our development, from when we uttered our first word, walked our first step, and when we graduated from high school. My mother had a lively, bubbly, effervescent personality, so the cheerful clothes she wore definitely reflected her zealous passion for life. People genuinely warmed to my mother. Even growing up, the kids in my year at school would always say they wished they had a mother like her, as she was pretty special. And even when I was a youngster, I certainly appreciated how fortunate I was to have a mother that was there for us all the time, especially when we grazed our knee, or needed her salient advice about something. My parents were as opposite as chalk is to cheese, but I believe that is why their relationship worked so well, as dare I say opposites definitely attract, and my parents absolutely adored the bones of each other, and they brought out the best in each other in what I believe was a perfect balance of yin and yang energy. Ostensibly, I think my very serious, solemn father needed someone bright and cheery like my mother to bring him out of his shell, and he did just that with a seemingly effortless ease. My reserved father was one of the most principled men you could ever hope to meet. He was a man of character. He was chivalrous, charming, and from a very young age, I knew I wanted to grow up and be exactly like him. He was the kind of steadfastly dependent man you could quite literally trust with your life, for he would never let you down or betray your trust. And in my opinion, that is a real man for you, in every sense of the word. I very much doubt that in my father's life there had ever been any other woman other than my mother, for my dad was as faithful and as loyal as the kind of dogs you sometimes hear about, that lie across their owners' graves after their owners die, because they were so incredibly attached to that beloved person in life, and want to remain close to them, even after they are gone from this world. My father was so devotedly loyal to my mother, that indeed if anyone had told my mother that my father was having an affair, or cheating on her, She'd have found the very idea nonsensical and hysterically funny, and wouldn't have believed a single word of it. She would have known it would not be true, in the same way you wouldn't believe an unfit person if they told you that the previous week they had climbed the Himalayas. There is no way on God's earth that my father would so much have given another woman a fleeting glance, for he only ever had eyes for my mother. Even if a pretty woman had passed my father in the supermarket, I can assure you he wouldn't have batted an eyelid, nor would he have noticed them. That was how immune he was to the attractiveness of other women. And honestly, it made me look on my father with a wondrous awe, because his integrity was completely unblemished by the provocative influences of our very sexualized world. As a consequence of my father's devout loyalty, I grew up in a very stable home, where I always felt safe and incredibly secure, as the spiritual roots of our family life, although not physically discernible, were made from very firm, solid foundations that could not be rocked. My father was as faithful and devoted to us as a male lion is towards his entire pride, ensuring no harm comes to any one of his family. For let's just say a male lion will fight to the death to protect his pride, and my father was exactly like that. Of course, I was aware of how lucky I was to have such a solid family life, because there were children at the school I attended whose families had broken up as one partner had been unfaithful to the other, and they had fallen out of love with each other. The relationship had collapsed, rather like a shaky camping chair that couldn't hold itself up for a very long time before coming apart. When my father learnt about some of these sad stories from my school of kids whose parents were getting divorced, he would describe those stories as tragic, as he considered all relationships between men and women to be precious, so if they fell apart, he believed they were flimsy in the first place. My father consisted of me. My name is Ernest, my younger brother William, who was 2 years younger than I was, my mother Mary, and my dad, of course, his name was Peter. Peter means rock, and yes, my father was indeed the rock of our family, so his name was very apt. My grandmother said when my father was born, she took one look at him and said, "He is Peter," for she knew that he would grow up to be the kind of man that would never let you down, and that was my father for you. I unfortunately didn't know much about my father's early years in his life, when he was a boy, although my dad was so attached to his roots that we were being raised in the same part of the world where he grew up, in Washington State. We lived close to the town of Leavenworth, which is a charming Bavarian village in Cheatham County that is nestled in the picturesque Cascade Mountains. The town itself has a reasonably small populace and is known for its unique architecture. My father was raised in my grandmother's home, not far from where we lived, in a rural location, surrounded by country roads, tall lofty trees, and the silhouettes of the glorious mountains, which we would embrace every single day. We were lucky that my father would take a 5-hour flight from Leavenworth to his job in Washington quite regularly, and the flights didn't bother him in the slightest, as he got so much work done on board the plane on the commute, and it didn't bother him at all. Sometimes he worked from home, handling negotiations for the bank, and it was pretty cool when he was around. But even when he was working from home, he dressed up as if he was going to the office, as my father was very formal in that regard, and said you couldn't be taking your job seriously if you were dressed sloppily. Our family had always been very close, so growing up me and my brother would cycle down the country lanes together to get to my grandparents' house. We practically lived 10 minutes away from each other, and as kids we enjoyed hanging around my grandparents' place. My father, being very reticently reserved by nature, was not very forthcoming about his childhood, and I guess I'd never actually asked my grandparents what he was like as a boy. I had of course seen photographs of my father around their farmhouse, as my grandmother had lots of family pictures displayed liberally around the place, including pictures of me and my brother when we were very young. Sometimes when I looked at these photographs, I felt as if I was looking at a picture of myself. Even my grandmother said it was uncanny that I was the splitting image of my father. I had his dark brown hair and a rather broad face, with very blue piercing eyes. But unfortunately, like my father, I'd also inherited his rather bad eyesight, so regrettably I had to wear glasses every day, much like he did. My brother William, on the other hand, looked much more like my mother's father, with his curly blonde hair and his blue eyes. But he also had great eyesight, so he didn't have the handicap of having to wear glasses daily that had become the bane of my life from an early age. Although I will admit my grandmother did tell me that the glasses I wore accentuated my blue eyes. I believed her. My grandmother never said anything just to be kind, or something she didn't mean. On one unassuming day, my father took our family by surprise, when he did share an unorthodox, outlandish story with all of us, about something that had happened to him in his teenage years, when he was round about the same age as me and my brother were at the time. His story rarely impacted me and my brother's lives so very much, as being teenagers, we were naturally always looking for an adventure. It all began on an ordinary Friday night, when our family was fast asleep in our beds. All of a sudden, from what had been a peaceful slumber, without anybody stirring in our household, there came a loud, urgent rapping at our front door. It sounded as if someone was hitting our door down with a baseball bat. That was how disturbing the sound was. I cannot remember a time in my young life when I was so startled, so much so that I was abruptly woken from my sleep. I remember sitting up on my bed, feeling somewhat bewildered and disturbed, thinking, what the hell is that? My whole body began to shake like a rattle, as the banging persisted, almost as if whoever was outside our door would likely break it down if we didn't open it. The disruptive, unsettling noise made my blood run cold, as all kind of weird scenarios began to wildly play out in my mind. It sounded as if the Grim Reaper was standing at our door. My first base instinct was to crawl under my bed and hide away, as pathetic as that may sound, but I didn't do that. I was sure that our front door would be kicked down in any second, and this insidious individual, whoever he was, probably with a pickaxe in his hand, would be after us, like in one of those horror movies you watch, only this was being played out in real time. I was absolutely certain that whoever was at the front door was dangerously predatory, even though we lived in an area uncontaminated by crime. But it's hard to explain just how terrifying that knock at the door actually was, when your imagination is in overdrive. It didn't help, of course, that me and my brother William, at the time, were completely fixated by horror movies, and we loved watching them. So their harrowing influences over our fertile imaginations didn't exactly serve us very well. "Who is at the door, Dad?" asked my brother William in a trembling voice. He had run into my parents' bedroom, with me close behind him. We nervously watched my father climb out of bed in his blue and white pinstripe pyjamas, wrapping himself in his red and black tartan dressing gown, while he slipped his feet into his blue slippers. My mother had practically jumped out of bed in alarm, as if someone had hit her with a slingshot. She was flapping like a distressed pigeon, and nervously putting on her pale pink dressing gown and her fluffy pink slippers. I could see there was a discernible fear written in her eyes. "I don't know, son, who's at the door," said my father, "but I'm about to find out. But I wish they wouldn't keep banging like that. It's very disturbing." "Please, please, Dad, don't open the door," said my brother, looking affrighted. He was reaching out to hold my father back with his arm. "Supposing, Dad, that there's a bad man at the door who wants to blow off our heads with his shotgun. You hear stories, don't you, Dad? He could be deranged. He could be a lunatic. He could be from a mental asylum." "Son, we don't live in the Wild West," said my father, with a slight irritation that was discernible in his voice. "You kids shouldn't watch so many horror movies, should you? Their influences on your imagination are not good." Someone is pounding at the door and I've got to answer it, and I'm quite sure it's not the Grim Reaper." My mother was still trembling like a leaf. She looked decidedly nervous. "Oh, Peter, please don't answer the door," she said. "The kids are right. I don't have a good feeling about this. Anybody could be out there. I mean, no one comes banging at your door at this insane hour of the morning, do they? Something is decidedly wrong, and I don't like it at all." My father ignored my mother and my brother's anguished protestations, while I just bit my lip so hard that the blood began to trickle down my throat. I could taste the salty metallic overload on my tongue, which wasn't at all pleasant. "Don't overreact, darling," said my father. "We won't know who's at the door if we don't answer it, will we? And don't worry, I've taken precautions. I have a hunting rifle with me. So if someone is standing at the door with ill intent, who means to harm him, I'll blow his head off first before he gets to hurt any one of us. But I am quite sure you're overreacting, and that our visitor is benevolent." My father's words did not serve to comfort or reassure any of us, but there was no arguing with him, so we all just shut up. My father reached for his hunting rifle and trotted easily down the stairs, taking charge of things as he always did so stoically. There was nothing in his demeanour that suggested he was even a tad concerned about our nightly visitor, but that was my father for you. Nothing ever ruffled his feathers. He was made of tough stuff. My mother whispered under her breath, "Who is at the door at this time of night?" I could hear the fear in her voice. I glanced very briefly at the clock in the hallway. It was 3:30 in the morning. You've got to be kidding. I knew my mother was absolutely right. No one in their right mind should be knocking at our front door at this insane hour of the morning, and I just wished that my father and me and my brother would return to bed, dive under our covers, and just pretend none of this had happened. Instead, I stood there, rather bemused, I have to say, gormlessly waiting to see what would happen next, and fearing for the very worst. My stoic father was completely unflappable, and continued to tell my mother to calm down and to stay back as he reached for the front door. My father stood at the door for a moment and called out, "Who is it?" "It's me, Peter," came a squeaky voice. "It's Anita Sanderson." I recognized the female voice at once, although the voice sounded frightened. It was our next-door neighbour, Mrs. Sanderson, who lived in the nearest farmhouse to ours. But what on earth was she doing here at this ungodly time of the morning, were the first thoughts that were anchoring themselves in my mind. "Are you all right, Anita?" asked my father, immediately opening the front door to let the terrified woman in. Anita was shaking like a leaf. She looked nervously behind her shoulders, as if she thought something might be there, and then she scrambled rather awkwardly into our house, like a frightened rabbit, and brought in with her a blast of icy cold air that was extremely chilly. She looked dishevelled. There were leaves and twigs in her hair, mud on her chin, and scratches all over her face. Her nightdress was ripped in parts. She was wearing a pair of slippers that were once fluffy, but no longer was that the case, for they were covered in mud. In truth, she looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. There was fear in her eyes, so from her disquieted expression and her nervous temperamental movements, I knew something bad must have happened for her to arrive at our house in such a state, but I couldn't think what it was that could have caused her such obvious distress. But I was about to find out about that, and what she was going to tell me would shake me to the core. My mother took Anita into her arms and spoke to her lovingly, like you would reassure a child that has just woken up from a terrible nightmare. "It's going to be all right, Anita. Honestly, relax, look at you. You're shaking all over. Calm down. Breathe in very slowly. I can get you a brown paper bag if you like. Take deep breaths. That's right, that's it. Now tell us, what's going on? Why are you so distressed? What are you doing here at this ungodly hour of the morning? What has happened to you? Look at your clothes, and look at your face. You're all scratched up." Anita couldn't say anything. It was almost as if her tongue was tied for a moment, and all she could do was mumble under her breath, but her words were so muted we could barely hear anything she was saying. "I'm sorry, Anita, but you're going to have to speak out. I can't hear a word you're saying. You're in such a dreadful state, dear. I've never seen you like this before." "Darling, I think it's best you take Anita into the kitchen. She's in no state to talk. She's shaking all over. Make her a hot chocolate with some brandy in it. She looks like she's had a nasty shock of some kind. I'm sure the brandy will give her some Dutch courage." Before long my mother had a kettle on, and was making mugs of hot chocolate for us all, while we gathered around Mrs. Sanderson eagerly, like a flock of geese, to hear what she had to say, for we could not comprehend what could have possibly shaken her so much that she had been banging on our door in the middle of the night and woken our entire family up. The first thing my father said is, "Ralph didn't do this to you, did he, Anita?" My father's eyes were looking at all the scratches on Anita's arms and face, and there was an appalled expression on his face, as if he was suddenly wondering if Anita Sanderson had been a victim of abuse and run to our house in the middle of the night. It would seem the very suggestion from my father that Anita's husband Rolf may have laid a hand on her brought Anita out of her shell, rather like a hermit crab that is being poked with a stick by a child. She quickly leapt to her husband's defence, and finally she managed to find her voice, that had been lost for a moment. She said, "Good Lord, no! Ralph would never lay a finger on me. My husband's a very good man. Anyway, if you must know, he's not here. He's away at an agricultural show at the moment. I'm at home alone. My children are staying with their grandparents. If you must know, I got scratched up in the woods. That's all. It was so dreadfully dark in there, so very frightening. I couldn't see where I was going, even though I had my torch with me. I was running into trees and thorny briars. That's why I got badly scratched up. I also fell down a few times, which is why my nightdress is all ripped up. Some of the paths in there are riddled with burgeoning roots, you know. It's very easy to lose your footing. I tripped a few times. It was that thing I was running from. That grotesque thing. You have no idea. I thought it was going to get me. I really did. I thought he was going to kill me. I thought I was going to die." By all accounts, it would appear that the brandy and the hot chocolate had done a remarkable job in making Anita suddenly make sense. Her words were coming out fluidly, but rather fast, like a garden hose that has a life force of its own and is hard to hold on to. She seemed so rattled by something, but at least we could make sense of what she was saying. My first thought, which I'm quite sure was shared with my father, my brother and my mother, was what the hell had Anita been doing in the woods in the early hours of the morning like this? And what was this grotesque thing that she claimed was chasing her? "What exactly happened, Anita? None of anything you're saying is making any sense to me. I mean, you're all scratched up. You're in a dreadful state. You say something was chasing you?" "Oh, I was definitely chased by this monstrous thing. There are no words to describe it to you. But it's a long story. It's hard to explain what happened, because in truth I'm not exactly sure. It's all such a fog now. I had a glass of wine tonight before I went to bed. Well, maybe a little more than I would normally have," she said, blushing, her cheeks going red, as if admitting to indulging in too much drink was more than a little embarrassing for her to have to admit. "It's just, you see, when Ralph's away from home, I do overindulge on the wine. It calms me down. I get quite anxious when he's not around. And without the children being here, the house felt like a mausoleum, if you know what I mean. I find when I'm home alone, well, it suddenly gets so noisy at night. And everything that goes bump in the night makes me jump out of my skin, rather. When Ralph's here, I'm not bothered by any of these noises. But when I'm on my own, it's a whole different ball game altogether, and it's very difficult to sleep without wine in my system to help steady my nerves. But I assure you, everything that happened to me tonight was real." "We don't doubt that something happened to you, Anita. You're in a dreadful state, aren't you?" said my mother kindly, encouraging Anita to go on with her story, and reassuring her, in not so many words, that no matter how outlandish her story might appear, we would almost certainly believe her. Anita looked grateful to have a listening audience that wasn't dismissing what she was saying out of hand, but I have to admit I did privately wonder if she'd drunk far too much and allowed her imagination to play tricks on her, as being home alone in a noisy house in the middle of the night can be very disquieting, and Anita Sandelson lived in a very large house that was much older than our house was. But even so, she did claim that something had chased her from her house through the woods, so I wondered where her story would take us, and I was more than a little intrigued. Was it possible that this monstrous thing she claimed had chased her through the woods was a hallucination of her own creation, brought on by drinking way too much? That I could not help but feel was a definite possibility. Another rather awkward question that clawed at my mind was what had possessed a woman like Anita, predisposed to being terribly afraid of being left at home on her own, to go and leave the safety of our house in the middle of the night like that, and go wandering about out of doors. I wouldn't do it myself, if I was inclined to be as nervous as she was. Anita helped herself to the box of tissues my mother presented her with. She blew her nose hard into the paper. She looked up at us all apologetically, for I think she felt rather bad for waking us up all at this ungodly hour of the morning. But we were beyond caring now. We wanted to know exactly what had happened to Anita, for no one got this dishevelled for no reason at all, even if they had enjoyed a tad too much alcohol to drink. Anita regarded us all through narrowing eyes, as if she was testing the waters as to whether she could trust us or not. "Well, it doesn't feel real, but it happened. I promise you it did. And it wasn't the drink that made me see this thing. This thing was so real. I remember him so vividly. The trouble is, I'm not sure you're going to believe my story. It sounds so dreadfully far-fetched, ridiculous even. And if I recount it all to you, I think you're going to think I'm a very, very silly, overwrought woman. You might think it's the drink talking, but I assure you it's not. This grotesque beast was after me. I'm telling you it was. You have no idea how terrifying this thing was. Oh, my God, the teeth on it! There are no words. It was chasing me through the woods." Anita's eyes widened. "I thought it was going to kill me. I'm telling you, it was looking at me with these furiously enraged eyes, as if it was desirous to rip me to shreds. I'm not exaggerating. It was drooling. There was so much spittle on this thing. I could never dream up such a creature in my own imagination, I assure you. I know what I saw was real." "Never you mind, Anita. Whatever it was you claim was chasing you, it didn't kill you, did it?" said my mother. "Why don't you start at the very beginning?" I could see that, much like myself and my brother, my mother was beginning to doubt Anita's story, and was wondering if her friend had panicked because her husband was away, and had gone out of doors possibly to investigate a strange noise she'd heard, and suddenly imagined that she was being chased by a monster in the woods, and had run off in a terrible panic. "Tell us what happened, Anita. You're safe now," said my mother. "Nothing bad is going to happen to you here, I assure you." Anita took a big sip of her cocoa, pausing for a brief moment. All eyes in the kitchen were fixed steadily on her as she told us her story, and when she did, you could have heard a pin drop in our kitchen. "Well, I'm a light sleeper most of the time, especially when Ralph is away. I have to say the house has been so dreadfully quiet during the day, and I've been mudding around on my own doing the chores, and without the children around, because they're staying with their grandparents, I felt all the more vulnerable being in the home all on my own. As I was saying at night, My house, unfortunately, makes all kinds of groans and strange noises, and they can become quite disquieting, so much so that it's impossible to get any good quality sleep. I just felt so unsettled all the time, imagining that someone was there, when they probably weren't. I kept seeing dark shadows in my bedroom in the corner of my eyes, but I know, of course, it was a trick of the light. But, without Rolf around, I just can't seem to relax." "Well, that would make perfect sense to me," said my father kindly. "You're alone in your house, Anita, and your house is a lot older than ours, and that's really saying something. Our house can also be awfully noisy at night. We've had people staying at our house swearing the place is haunted, but it's not, of course. It can be airy, though, at night, and doubtless your house, being so much older than ours, is much the same. How can I say this? But old houses are notorious for making strange noises, and when you're rattling around in a big house on your own at night, the noises can be deafening. I'm the first to appreciate that. As for the dark shadows you see at night, well, it happens to all of us, does it not? Of course you're bound to think you're seeing something that isn't actually there, as unfortunately, when we're afraid, our imaginations can be our very worst enemy. I know that because my 2 boys and my wife here were having a panic attack when you banged on the door this morning, at an ungodly hour, if you don't mind my saying so." "Oh, I'm so sorry about that," said Anita apologetically. "I didn't mean to alarm anyone. I was just so desperately afraid, so frightened this thing would come after me." "No need to apologize, Anita," said my father politely. "You know I had a friend once who lived close to an airport. He got very used to the aeroplanes flying over his family home. He barely noticed them at all. He didn't visit his family for many years once he'd left the place, and the first night he returned home he couldn't sleep a wink, because the noises of those aircrafts flying over his old house was deafening to him. And yet in the past those very same noises he heard, night after night, didn't impact him at all. I suspect he barely noticed them until he went away for a while and returned. Your being alone in your house is going to make every noise you hear exceedingly disquieting." "Well, I guess that does make perfect sense to me. I was on tenterhooks, I've got to admit that to you," said Anita Sanderson. "I've been acutely aware of every noise I hear. I wasn't sleeping well, and then Badger was making a huge noise in the kitchen downstairs, and Badger isn't exactly a noisy dog. He's deaf in one ear, you see, so he's never given us much trouble during the night. But last night it was like he instinctively knew something was going on outside the farmhouse, and for him to bark in the way he did, well, it was very unusual. As I said, he's deaf in one ear, and yet he could sense that something wasn't right. And when I say he was barking loudly, that's an understatement. He was actually going ballistic. So I rushed downstairs into the kitchen and noticed that he was furiously scratching at the back door, as if he wanted to get out. That was when I knew instinctively something was out there that had got his attention. So I told him to quieten down, which he did, and I stood at the door and listened myself. That was when I heard the most ungodly squawking sound, coming from the chicken coop. It was absolutely terrifying, let me tell you. I was shaking like a leaf, and thinking how typical it was that Rolf so happened to be away when this happened. My first instinctive thought was that a fox or a coyote had somehow managed to get into the chicken coop and was attacking my chickens, and I was not going to allow that carnage to happen under any circumstance. So I quickly grabbed Rolf's rifle and dashed out of the kitchen in my nightdress and slippers. I'm not intimidated by coyotes or foxes, even though I admit the dark does intimidate me. I didn't even bother to put on my dressing gown, you know. I was in a rush to get rid of that predator that was attacking my chickens, and I was determined that I'd kill it if I found it. I left Badger in the kitchen I didn't want him to get caught in the crossfire if I was to shoot at the fox or coyote that was attacking my chickens. But I'm not exactly a good shot at the very best of times, and my husband can testify to that. I dashed out of the back door of the kitchen, running to the chicken coop as fast as I could, with my torch in my hand to guide me, because it was very dark out there. When I got to the chicken coop, the wire had been torn wide open. There was a massive hole, and the chickens were in disarray, squawking in terror. 3 chickens were already dead. Their heads were torn off and lying on the ground. It was carnage, let me tell you. A devastating sight. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Anita," said my mother sympathetically, putting a kind hand on the woman's narrow shoulders. "I know how fond you are of your chickens. Did you see what was attacking them by any chance?" "Not at first," said Anita, growing decidedly pale, as the colour suddenly left her face. "I didn't know what to do. There was no sign of the guilty culprit. But I felt watched, if you know what I mean. Almost as if the fox or the coyote or whatever was responsible for attacking my chickens was surreptitiously waiting in the wings for me to go back indoors, so he could come back to vandalize the chicken coop and behead all my remaining chickens. You see, there is a red fox population out here in the Cascades, but you probably know that already. But they are becoming significantly more rare. Me personally, I've witnessed a red fox sniffing around our coop with a great deal of interest. So I thought I was dealing with a fox, and I decided I was going to bring the chickens into the kitchen and sort out the coop in the morning, making it much more robust so it couldn't happen again. I didn't want any more carnage. I know what foxes are like when they get into a coop. They bite all the chickens' heads off and leave feathers scattered all over the place, and it's absolute carnage. I decided the only thing to do was to go back into the house, to get Badger, and, of course, to open the kitchen door so that I could allow the chickens to come into the house. I went back to the kitchen door, which was closed at this point, but that was when I saw him standing on the step outside the kitchen door. I thought what I was seeing could not be real. I had to be dreaming this, because it was just so ludicrous to be seeing something like this in our reality. He had been eating, but he stopped eating for a moment and just stood and just stared at me. I think we sort of made eye contact together. I even forgot about the firearm I was carrying in my hand, because I thought that I was dreaming lucidly. I rubbed my eyes a couple of times and even pinched myself to check I was awake, and was horrified to find that this was not a dream. "So you saw this strange creature?" my mother asked. "I saw the thing that attacked my chickens, and I assure you of this, it was not a coyote, nor was it a fox. It was a grotesque monster. There are no other words to describe it. It was horrifying. Never seen anything like it in my life. And if you told me such a thing existed in our reality, I would tell you you were stark raving mad. But this thing was real." "What exactly do you mean by a monster?" my mother asked, giving my father a quick sideways glance. Anita Sandelson trembled as she told us about the idiosyncratic creature that she had seen. "He was standing on the front step of my kitchen, ripping away the feathers from one of my dead chickens and chomping parts of the chicken he had defeathered. There were feathers everywhere, let me tell you, all over the kitchen step. He was eating raw chicken and bones together. But he only stopped eating when he saw me approaching the kitchen door. I almost wonder if he was standing there deliberately to scare me. I couldn't be sure. I could hear that horrible crunching sound he was making, that you often hear when your dog is chewing a bone. There was blood all over this thing's jaws. It was dribbling down his face, along with large globules of spittle that rather reminded me of aloe vera gel. That was how thick and translucent it was. Absolutely vile, disgusting. And the sharp teeth on this thing, well, there are no words." "What exactly did this thing look like, Anita?" my father asked solemnly. He looked to me like a wolf man. There's no other way to describe him. Half man, half wolf, perhaps. He was covered in patchy thatches of dark brown hair. I rather suspect he might have had mange. There were bones sticking through his flesh. He was emaciated and scrawly, and I think I don't think he was in the best of health, so to speak. But he was powerful and reasonably sizable, so to speak. He stood up quite tall on 2 feet. I think he might have been 6 foot, perhaps. He had the head of a wolf, and I noticed he had 2 rows of very sharp teeth and horrible, horrible red eyes that looked almost demonic. Anita Sanderson paused for a moment, as if trying to compose herself, and then she continued, describing the creature she had encountered. When I saw him, I screamed. He was the most terrifying beast I have ever beheld. He really did remind me of a real-life werewolf, you know. I couldn't get back into the house by way of the kitchen, for he was blocking my path. I couldn't go to the barn to hide. The door was locked. I tried to fire at this wolf-like creature, but I realized to my horror there were no bullets left in my rifle. I completely forgot to load it. I'm absolutely useless with firearms, and I'm simply terrified to use one anyway. I can't believe I was so stupid. If the rifle had been loaded, I could have shot at this thing. He'd have lightly bolted, and I could have locked myself back in the house very safely, and prayed to God that this thing would never come back, or cause any further carnage with my chickens. Well, after I took aim at this wolf-like humanoid, and nothing happened with the rifle, the creature began to give me chase. I think it realized my husband's rifle was pretty useless, and was not going to harm him at all. And I rather suspect I'd provoked him to anger, for I'd attempted to kill him, or at the very least scare him away. So he wanted revenge, I suppose. I don't know this for sure, of course, but I did sense he was irate. There was nothing I could do but run straight into the woods as fast as I could, as there was nowhere left for me to go, and the only place I thought of was going to your farmhouse. Badger was going ballistic inside the kitchen, barking like crazy and scratching the door frantically. I think he must have smelt this thing a mile away, because it stank to high heaven of what I can only describe as a very bad yeast infection, mixed with the smell of a dead rat rotting in an alleyway or something. I decided the only thing to do was to run straight to your farmhouse by way of the woods. I knew it was the one place I could find sanctuary, which was why I began banging on your door so hard in the early hours of the morning, and I do apologize for that. Anyway, while the creature was giving me chase, I wasn't sure whether this thing would get me or not. It was so close behind me. I could hear it snorting and breathing heavily. I had my torch with me, but it was so dark in the woods, and when you're running for your life, you fall over burgeoning roots that trip you up when you can't see properly. I was in such a frenzied panic, I thought I was already dead. This thing, there's no way to describe it. He was so incredibly agile, very nimble on his feet. My legs, on the other hand, felt like cement blocks beneath me. It was like they'd become uselessly heavy and inefficient, and were weighing me down. So it was almost as if I was wading through water as I ran. But then against all the odds, I think the adrenaline just suddenly shot through my system very quickly, and I began to run like a March hare. I didn't dare look behind me. Even though I was trying to get to your farmhouse through the labyrinths of trees at the dead of night, my visibility was badly distorted. Everything was hazy and obscure, and indefinite, you could say. I couldn't see where I was going, and I was pretty sure I was beginning to run around in circles. I did feel rather like a cornered animal, because I was getting ensnared by thorny briars and extended tree branches that seemed to reach out and grab me, as if they too wanted to wrestle me to the ground. One of those branches, I have to say, almost took my eye out, but by that point I didn't care at all. All I could think about was wanting to survive, especially for my children and husband's sake. If this thing had got me, well, my family might never know what had happened to me, said Anita, beginning to whimper. Imagine how my husband would be, without a wife and kids, without a mother, Just the thought, I cannot bear it. I'm telling you, I would have died tonight. No one would have known what had happened to me if that thing, that grotesque thing, hadn't been stopped in its tracks. I don't think I'd be here now." My mother patted Anita Sanderson on the hand. "Well, you're here now, dear, safe and well, and that's all that matters. That thing cannot hurt you now." At this point, I was quick to interject into the conversation. "But I don't understand, Mrs. Sanderson. Why this beast didn't catch up with you. I mean, this thing probably has night vision and is nimble on his feet, as you say. If you really believe it was after you, then why didn't it get you? Maybe it didn't intend to hurt you after all. Maybe it just wanted to scare you. But you say it was stopped. What do you exactly mean by that, Mrs. Sanderson?" "That's it, Ernest. That thing would have got me if it hadn't been for the Bigfoot. I know you're going to think that this part of my story is crazy, as my night was full of all kinds of surprises, let me tell you. For a start, I never believed that creatures like Bigfoot even existed until I saw one, and this thing was monumental in size. He blew my mind, he was so large. I'm not sure if the Bigfoot actually meant to intervene on my behalf, but the wolfman was screaming when it grabbed him, and the Bigfoot was throttling him and thrashing his body against a tree. I doubt the wolfman that was following me could have actually survived that attack. You see, the Bigfoot towered over him. He was strapping and powerful, and the wolfman that chased me was no match compared to him." At this startling revelation in Anita's story, that was becoming weirder and weirder by the second, me, my mother, and my brother were giving each other rather funny looks, because her story was becoming increasingly far-fetched. "Bigfoot," I said with a cheeky grin. "Mrs. Sanderson, are you making this up? I'm sorry, but I don't buy Bigfoots are real. I almost believed you about the wolfman, but the Bigfoot, no, that's stretching things way too far." "Mrs. Sanderson is not making this up, son," said my father, leaping at once to Anita's defense. "She's telling you the truth. Bigfoots are real. I know this because I've seen a Bigfoot myself, when I was round and about your age. So don't be dismissive about cryptid creatures, because I assure you they do exist." At this paradoxical comment coming from my father, that took us all by surprise, all went very quiet in the kitchen, as we all just looked at each other incredulously, as if my father's words had hit us like a jolt of electricity, and our safe little paradigms of the world had been cruelly shattered in a single instant, as if we suddenly had to rethink our entire view on things. My father was a quiet man by nature, who never lied a single day in his life, and for him to say cryptid creatures were real, then how could I doubt him for a second? In that moment my skepticism turned into belief, and a burgeoning sense of excitement began to take root inside of me. Because now what Mrs. Sanderson was revealing to us no longer seemed like fictitious mumbo-jumbo. Her words had become credible. If my father, a man of such noble character, believed her story, then so did I. "Mrs. Sanderson," I asked, "what happened with the Bigfoot? You say he attacked the wolfman that was chasing you. Is that right?" "That's right, Ernest. The wolf creature was chasing me, running after me at such a rapid pace. At one point I fell over a gnarled root, you see, thrust up through the earth like a treacherous claw. I grazed my knees and twisted my ankle. The pain was excruciating, let me tell you. My ankle was throbbing. I tried to get to my feet, and that was when I heard the wolfman getting closer to me. And with my ankle in such pain, well, I actually thought I was a goner, didn't I? All of a sudden I heard this ear-piercing scream coming from behind me, and I was certain it came from the wolfman, because he was getting close to me and was about to pounce on me in any second. I grabbed a broken branch from the ground that I could use as a defensive weapon to fight him off, as my ability to run was dramatically impaired by now. My ankle was barely able to support my body weight. The pain I was feeling was tremendous, and we all know how a wounded animal is easy pickings. So I thought it was over Cadovus for me, I really did. But I was too overcome with terror to even pray. I turned around for a second to face my opponent, and at this point I was determined to fight with everything in me, because what else did I have to lose? But that was when I saw the Bigfoot, and that was when I realized the wolfman had been ambushed by the Bigfoot and was screaming in terror. It wasn't because the wolfman wanted to pounce on me. It was because the wolfman himself had been pounced on. It was the kind of ear-piercing sound you'd expect to hear if a woman was being murdered. That was how that wolfman was screaming. So you're saying a Bigfoot apprehended and attacked the wolfman that was chasing you? I said again. That's exactly what happened, Ernest. The Bigfoot grabbed the wolf-like humanoid, as if it weighed no more than a feather, and then he thrashed this wolf creature against the tree so very hard. Everything went quiet. I remember even the crickets and frogs stopped singing. I think the wolf-like creature was dead. He was swinging from the Bigfoot's arms like a pendulum. There was blood absolutely everywhere, all over the tree trunk, scattered liberally all over everything. I stood there staring at the Bigfoot in bemusement. He stared back at me for a while. Neither of us made any sound. I'm not exactly sure how long we stared at each other for. I was so frozen. I was literally unable to move. The Bigfoot then roared at me, and I heard in my head, "Go! Go!" And I came here. But even as I ran directly to your farmhouse with a throbbing ankle that was killing me, let me tell you, I was very scared the wolfman would somehow gain traction again, raise himself from the dead, so to speak, because it's hard to explain this to you. But he looked so demonic. Like, like a creature you'd expect to find in hell, I suppose. And so, I don't know whether the thing was supernatural, but it definitely was real. I mean, it was eating that chicken outside my kitchen door. So it was real. But there was something so supernatural about it at the very same time. It's very hard to explain, of course. So you think the Bigfoot protected you? Protected you from this wolf man? I asked excitedly. I don't know the answer to that, Ernest. I wish I did. I mean, the Bigfoot told me in my head to go at once. I think he killed the wolf-like humanoid, but I was so terrified. I wasn't sure if the Bigfoot was benevolent or not. So when he told me to go, well, I did just what he asked. And I just walked back to your house, or ran back, on the most painful ankle imaginable. But I ran through the pain, and I got here. Well, I sincerely hope, Mrs. Sanderson, that werewolf-like creature you saw is dead. I hope it can't come back to life. Oh, I'm quite sure he is dead, said my father very confidently. I think that coming up against a Bigfoot like that would have sealed the deal for him. He wouldn't have stood a chance. That night, or perhaps I should more correctly say, in the early hours of the morning, after we'd been rudely awoken from our slumber by a very affrighted Mrs. Sanderson, after much reassurance on my mother's part, she managed to prepare the woman a spare bed in our house for the night. The following morning, she was in a much better frame of mind, even though she was very much on edge, always looking nervously towards the wood grove. My father quickly drove her home for her to get some extra clothes, and of course to get Badger her dog, and then she and Badger stayed in our farmhouse for the next few days, until finally her husband returned from his trip to the agriculture fair. Me and my brother William were naturally intrigued and incredibly curious about Mrs. Sanderson's rather paradoxical story, and naturally, like any inquisitive teenager with an inquiring mind, we ventured into the woods that morning to see if we could see for ourselves any telltale signs of the drama that unfolded the previous night. We wanted to make sense of Mrs. Sanderson's story in some way. When we entered the wood grove, me and my brother started searching frantically for signs of a scuffle, blood on a tree perhaps, pieces of hair caught in a bramble bush, anything that could validate Mrs. Sanderson's nonsensical story, as we wanted some kind of proof that what she claimed happened really was authentic. My father had affirmed that creatures like this existed, and his revelations the previous night had made my spine all but tingle with the thrill of my intrigue, for the possibility that creatures like this existed had made our somewhat humdrum lives become infinitely more thrilling. I wondered why my father had kept his knowledge of Bigfoot being real so cloak and dagger, but he had leapt to Mrs. Sandalson's defence immediately when we had started to doubt her far-fetched story. Me and my brother, one way or another, wanted to get my father to talk about his encounter. I'm afraid to say my father, for as long as I've known him, has never been terribly forthcoming about much. It seemed almost insane to me and my brother that a story like this had happened so close to home, with Mrs. Sandalson, I mean. We were champing at the bit to have a story of our own. I imagined what it would be like to tell my friends at school that I'd actually seen a wolf man or a Bigfoot, and I knew they would believe me, as like my father, I seemed incapable of lying, and I was always teased for being so incessantly honest. Me and my brother were typical teenagers, of course, that loved exploring, and we were naturally curious by nature. We were exceedingly fascinated by the things going on around us. We were passionate about horror stories on TV, and loved being scared half to death, for it was a thrill to us. If cryptid creatures like Bigfoot were real, we wanted to see a Bigfoot for ourselves, with our own naked eye. The trouble with the natural world is that she's very good at keeping secrets and hiding evidence behind a veil of foliage, so that anything that has been disturbed the night before has a way of remaining hidden. When me and my brother searched the woodgrove, it was as if anything that had happened only hours ago had somehow been sandblasted away. It was in that quintessential moment I wished with all my heart that I was a tracker, as people who can read the terrain, like you and I can read a book, can easily discern the disturbances in the natural fauna and flora that few of us would ever be able to pick up, unless we were trained to read the natural terrain in the way a tracker so obviously can. The woodgrove on this magnificent Saturday morning was flooded with wisps of pretty sunshine that trickled through the trees and washed the forest in a soft ethereal light. But it looked as it always did. It seemed benevolently benign. And if what had happened the previous night with Mrs. Sandalson had been lost, then there was no chance we could ever find any evidence of her story. The woodgrove was resolutely giving nothing away, like a stubborn brother or sister that refuses to include you in their secret. Even the birds tweeting cheerfully in the forest canopy did not display any sense of disquiet, and the cheerful tunes that filtered through the trees spoke of a day that was much like any other. We started to look for some blood on the ground, until our eyes grew tired and weary, and our resolve waned. I mean, let's not kid. If the Bigfoot had thrashed the wolf-like humanoid against the tree and probably killed it, surely there would be some evidence of it. I rightly assumed there had to be some blood somewhere. It was at this point that my brother, who was beginning to lose heart, began to kick furiously at the fallen leaves and foliage on the forest floor. He was becoming frustrated that our search had been so fruitless, and just as we were about to give up on our intrepid exploration of the woods, that was when we saw the revealing red droplets of blood on a tree trunk, and some spilled on the fallen leaves on the forest floor. For a moment me and my brother were lost for words as we observed the rather macabre scene, like two dry sponges soaking up the moisture of this new information. We both stood there staring at each other, because it was hard to believe we had stumbled on this extraordinary find. This must be where it had all happened, I told my brother. This must be where the Bigfoot whacked the wolfman against the tree. It did happen. It had to have happened. It was at that point my brother uttered the words, "Bloody hell!" as that was all my brother ever said when he couldn't find any other words to express his extreme astonishment. My brother was pointing to something big that looked like a long piece of rolled-up dark carpet lying on the ground. "What's that?" he asked me. He then pushed the thing over with the back of his boot. So it rolled over, and in this dishevelled, hideously big rag-like thing that was soaked with blood We observed a human-like body, covered in hair, which had the face and features of a wolf. We discovered we were looking at the deceased, decomposing body of what appeared to be a very strange creature that was half man and half wolf. The body was rapidly descending into decay and smelt really rank and disgusting, as Mrs. Sanderson had said. The creature had 2 rows of teeth, was very emaciated, and had a long, thick tail. We stared at each other incredulously, and then ran back to the house as fast as we possibly could, our hearts pounding violently in our chests, our breasts raspy. We wanted to tell my father about our weird find, but when we returned to the woods again with my father at our side, the deceased corpse of the wolfman was nowhere to be found, and we began to search high and low for it, but it had mysteriously all but disappeared, which in itself was exceedingly weird. "Dad, I promise you it was there," said my brother, insistently, his eyes growing wide. "Look at the tree over there. The trunk's got blood all over it. That's where it happened. The body was lying over there. It looked like a rolled-up piece of carpet. I promise you, it really was over there." "I believe you, son. But the body is gone now. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's go back to the house, shall we, and forget this ever happened. I'm afraid Mrs. Sanderson had a terrible shock last night. But if it makes both you boys feel any better, it's very unusual for lightning to strike in the same place twice. I don't want you boys living your lives with angst, because I'm quite sure that the woods are perfectly safe. They certainly feel so." It must have been 2 days later that over the dinner table my mother was going on and on about poor Mrs. Sanderson. "She's not in a good way, you know," she told my father. "But then I wouldn't expect her to be. She had such a terrible shock. Of course, her husband doesn't believe a word of her story. He said she was as drunk as a skunk and was obviously hallucinating and seeing things that weren't really there. I feel so desperately sorry for the woman. There's something so terribly frustrating about not being believed, especially by your own husband. She was telling me she wished she hadn't shared her story with him, because he keeps shaking his head and saying he wished she didn't drink so much when he was away. He does believe, of course, that a fox got into the chicken coop, but he doesn't believe a word of his wife's story about the wolf man. Not a word of it. He says it's all just nonsense." "Well, can you blame him, darling?" said my father. "The man's very cynical, isn't he? And Anita Sanderson made no secret of the fact that she drank a lot that night. She told us herself. She gets nervous living in a large, creepy house that makes a whole lot of noise when she's alone. I gather she always drinks to help her go to sleep. And if I was wearing her husband's shoes and had not had an experience with a cryptid creature myself, I would be as doubtful as Anita's husband obviously is. He believes it's all blown out of proportion. I'm just fortunate because I know Bigfoots are real. So when Anita told us her story, I didn't doubt it for a second. You saw yourself how affrighted she was. I don't know if you noticed, but she did smell of alcohol that night. So it isn't surprising her husband believed it was the drink talking. He even phoned me up to apologize for Anita waking us up at a god-awful hour of the morning. He told me that he absolutely believed that a fox had got into their chicken coop, but that his wife had overreacted and suddenly believed a monster was chasing her through the woods. He said she gets frightened when she's in the house alone and gets scared for no reason at all. She always gets pent up when she's home alone in that big old farmhouse." "Scared?" said my mother. "Is that what he calls it?" She was unable to hide the obvious sarcasm in her voice. "I think Anita Sanderson was a whole lot more than scared, don't you think? The woman was absolutely terrified. I very much doubt drinking too much alcohol is suddenly going to make you see Bigfoot. Why is that impossibly stubborn husband of hers literally refusing to believe a word his wife is telling him? What about our boys? They found the wolfman's body in the woods. Couldn't they tell Mr. Sanderson that his wife's story is true? I mean, they saw the creature themselves that gave her chase." "The body is long gone, darling," said my father. Besides, it's really none of our business, is it? We shouldn't interfere into other people's affairs, so to speak. Anita's husband doesn't believe a word of her story, and there's not a jot we can do about it, and we should leave it be." "The poor, poor woman," said my mother. "I've advised her to go and see a trauma counsellor, you know. The whole event has terrified her. She's afraid that there may be more of these wolf men around. She doesn't know whether the Bigfoot she encountered imposed a threat to her or not. So she's also afraid of the Bigfoot. She said he was monstrously huge." "You worry too much, darling, about so many things. I'm quite sure Anita Sanderson is going to be fine," said my father reassuringly. "When you've had a shock, it takes a long while to heal and adjust to what has happened. But sooner or later you reach acceptance, and then the healing can be quite rapid. How do I know? Because it happened to me." "Darling," said my mother, looking up at my father through her dark, inquiring eyes, "how long have we been married exactly?" "What a strange question for you to ask, darling. You can do the math, can you not?" "We have been married for 24 years, I'll have you know. And all this time you have never once told me about your encounter with a Bigfoot. All this is news to me. What secrets have you been keeping from me, darling?" "Keep your hair on. It's not like that, sweetheart. You know I don't keep secrets from you. The idea is absolutely ridiculous." "Well, I'm sorry, darling, but I beg to differ on that. You always told me and reassured me that there were no secrets between us. And then I find out that you had an experience with a Bigfoot when you were a boy that I knew nothing about." "Mum's right, Dad," I interjected. "Why haven't you told us about your encounter?" "Because it's not something I want to talk about. I try to put it in the back of my mind. I don't regard it as a secret. I regard it as something I would rather not talk about. There is a very big difference." "Well, you're not going to do that any more, darling, because I'm not leaving the dinner table until you tell me what happened to you. If you say these things are real, we want to hear your story, don't we, boys?" Me and my brother nodded rather lamely, while my heart felt as if it was tightly wedged in my chest, as I was certain my father would fob us off and tell us he didn't want to talk about his paradoxical experience. But he surprised us all when he got up from the dining-room chair somewhat stiffly and said, "Well, I'm not going to sit at the dining-room table to tell you the story. I need to sit somewhere comfortable. The living room will do nicely. I'll sit on one of those sofa chairs. If I'm going to tell you a story, I might as well do it in style. I'll need some hot chocolate with plenty of brandy in it, though." "Well, we can do that," said my mother. "I tell you what, I'll make some hot chocolate to go around for all of us, and then you can tell us your story, darling." Me and my brother looked at each other in disbelief. My father was going to share his story with us. I could hardly believe it, as getting anything out of my father was tantamount to extracting blood out of a stone. The fact that he was willing to share something with us about his encounter with a Bigfoot made me feel as if all my Christmases had come at once. Me and my brother William exchanged a secret high-five between each other and settled down in a couch opposite my father, our eyes pinned on him. Before long my mother appeared in the living room with a jiggling tray of mugs, all containing steaming cups of hot chocolate, with cream on the top and plenty of marshmallows. Alongside that, she had presented a plate of chocolate brownies for us to enjoy. For a long while we sipped our hot chocolates in silence, and me and my brother developed cream moustaches above our lips while we licked them away. No one had touched the plate of chocolate brownies, which was a first, as right now our undivided interest was in hearing my father's outlandish story. My father finally finished his hot chocolate, in which my mother had put a large measure of brandy. He let out a deep, contented sigh, and then sat back on the chair. "Well, where do I start?" he said. "I don't exactly consider myself the very best storyteller, but I'll try anyway." "Well, you don't have to embellish anything, darling," said my mother. "Not that that would ever happen to you, of course. You could never be accused of embellishing anything. Just tell us what happened. That's all we want to know. We're extremely interested, aren't we, boys?" Me and my brother said nothing, but we nodded in silence, waiting with bated breath for my father to continue with his story. My father drew in a deep breath, rubbed his moustache rather soberly, and then said, "It happened when I was about 16 years old, I suspect. My brother Gareth experienced it too. He also witnessed the Bigfoot that night." My mother's eyes almost popped out of her head, for she knew that, unlike Dad, Uncle Gareth was one of the most talkative, outgoing and gregarious people you could ever hope to meet, while my father was so reticently reserved compared to his brother. The fact that Uncle Gareth hadn't told any of us about this bizarre encounter of his was nothing short of extraordinary, for if there was anything to talk about, Gareth invariably would be out with it. He was a hairdresser, and realized he was gay when he was about 21 years old. Gareth would talk to his customers at the hairdressing salon he managed about everything and nothing. His female clientele naturally loved him, plying him with generous gifts and inviting him on extravagant holidays. He was effusive and expressed himself with dramatic gestures, calling everybody he knew darling. So the fact that he hadn't mentioned this Bigfoot encounter to us, or anyone else for that matter, was nothing short of astonishing. He was extremely close with my mother. They were the best of friends. And he would sometimes rock up at our front door and say things like, "Darling, you are not going to believe what happened today. Oh my goodness, you're not going to believe it." My mother would invite him into the house, and over coffee and cake Gareth would prattle away to his heart's content, as if his life depended on it. He was artsy and creative in so many ways, and always wore trendy, fashionable clothes. He looked uncannily like George Michael when he was young. So for Gareth to keep a story about a Bigfoot encounter hidden, especially from my mother, was baffling to say the very least. "Gareth knows about this?" my mother asked. This time she looked more than a little bewildered. "You've got to be joking. Your brother tells me absolutely everything. There's nothing he would keep from me. Why would he keep a Bigfoot encounter from me, for goodness sake?" "Of course he knows about this, love," my father said. "We experienced our Bigfoot encounter together, so I would think he would know about it, don't you? He was part of the experience." "But I don't understand," said my mother. She looked as if someone had just slapped her across the face with an ice-cold hand. She seemed confounded. "But me and Gareth, we are so very close. I just don't understand why he wouldn't share this with me. It's so unlike him. Gareth loves to shock people all the time. You know, he's so controversial like that. Why wouldn't he tell me something like this?" My father stroked his moustache reflectively. "Gareth may be an outgoing person, but what happened to the both of us that night is not something he has ever spoken about to anyone. In fact, after the experience, he said he didn't want to talk about it ever again. I guess we were both extremely rattled by what happened. He was absolutely terrified for weeks after the event. I remember he had terrible, terrible nightmares. And he even wet his bed a couple of times, and that had never happened before. He said he didn't want to think about it anymore. So I guess he just stashed that memory away and tried his damnedest to forget about it. And frankly, I can't blame him for that." "Was he worried no one would believe him? Is that it?" my mother asked. "He thinks people will laugh at him, perhaps, for suggesting that Bigfoot exists." "Well, there is that too, I suppose," my father admitted. "But when you've had a scare that has shaken you so hard, even the most garrulous of people, especially people like Gareth, may not be so forthcoming. And I would appreciate it, darling, when you see him next, that you make no mention of this to him. He would not appreciate me talking about this with any of you." "Was it really that bad, what happened to you?" my mother asked. "Were you as scared as what Mrs. Sanderson was the other night?" "Of course we were scared, love. We were petrified. We were teenagers at the time. Do you want to hear my story or not? Because if you keep asking all these questions, We won't get anywhere, will we?" "Very well," said my mother. "Please go on." "Well, where was I? Let's start at the beginning, shall I? Much like you two teenagers," said my father, looking over at me and William. "Gareth and I spent a lot of our time together. One of our favourite pastimes was to explore. We were inquisitive by nature, as most teenagers our age were. There was an old abandoned house that belonged to the Erickson family, and still does as far as I know. They abandoned the place, and it's still like that today. Even though they own it for some reason, they've never sold it. But there you go. People can be profoundly strange. My mother, your grandmother, told us that one day the Erickson family just up and left their house for no reason, and no one heard a dicky bird from them, although I understand they kept in touch with their solicitors, so the house remains in the family name. But they don't appear to want to sell up, which is strange, as the land alone could still fetch a pretty penny." "I know the house you're talking about, Dad. It's a pink house," I said. "The paint is now peeling, and the wraparound porch is disintegrating. The wood has rotted. The house is practically buried behind long grass and tall, lofty trees. Why hasn't anyone sold it? It pretty much has descended into decay. William and I went there once to look at the place. The house is empty. Everything is overgrown. I'm sure it was a stunning house at one time, though." "Well, what you say, son, is perfectly true. The house is still abandoned today, and at one point in time it was very stylish. The Ericksons were reasonably wealthy, so I guess they kept the property in the family name, never bothered to sell it, because they had so much money. But as to why they never sold it is the $100 question that still mystifies me today." "But why did the Ericksons abandon their own house?" my mother asked. "I've always wondered about the old place. I mean, it's been left derelict for years, hasn't it? And think about it, it's situated on a magnificent piece of land, and it's a 15-minute walk from here. Only 10 minutes away from your parents' place. If someone bulldozed that house and rebuilt it all over again, cleaning up the premises, it would be a very good investment, if you ask me. Would make a sizable amount of money, I'm most sure. I'm sure the land itself must be quite valuable. I mean, if I was a member of the Erickson family, and I didn't want to remain in my home, I'd put the place up for sale like any normal person would, and make some good money out of it. Instead, they leave their house, allowing it to rot. They never return to it again. I'm sorry, but I don't care how rich you are. Abandoning your home like that and not selling it is profoundly strange. No one has visited the place for years." "Well, I'm sure they must have had good reasons for not selling their property," said my father. "I know after what me and my brother experienced, we never dared go back to the place again. I was 16 years old at the time, you know. Many of the local kids were saying that the reason the Ericksons had up and left their property was because it was haunted. They believed there was an angry ghost on the property. One of the kids in the year below me at school said that he knew Tony Erickson very well. Tony Erickson was the oldest son of the family, I believe. Apparently he would tirelessly complain about loud banging sounds that would disturb them during the night. Apparently the family would get up out of bed and go and check the noises. They would open their door in the middle of the night, and nothing would be there, which they found incredibly airy. Not only that, but strange things were left on their doorstep. Stones, twigs, made out to look like cryptic kind of messages, as if they were being told to get the hell out of their house. That's how I think they saw it." "Well, that is incredibly creepy," said my mother. "The other night, I have to admit, when Mrs. Sanderson banged on our door so very loudly, I'm not going to kid when I tell you I thought we were being visited by the Grim Reaper himself. So if I were hearing banging sounds at our door every night like we did with Mrs. Sanderson, I would consider selling up straight away. I don't like mysteries, especially when they can't be solved. But at the very least, I would put the house on the market, not forsake it, in the way the Ericsons did." "I know exactly what you mean, Mum. I freaked the hell out when Mrs. Sanderson came to the door in the middle of the night like that. The way she banged the door, it was so loud, so terrifying. I began to fear the very worst. I wanted to hide under my bed. I thought someone insidiously evil was standing outside our front door. It was such a relief to find it was Mrs. Sanderson, but boy, didn't she look half rattled." "Well, then, maybe, son, you can fully appreciate what the Erikson family was going through at the time. I can't imagine it myself. Someone would knock at their front door at the dead of night, making an awful racket and commotion. And when they went to the door, nothing was ever there. Can you imagine how airy that must have been for them?" "I can't imagine," I agreed. "That must have been terrifying." "Well, anyway, the story about the strange, elusive knocking that would occur at the Erikson house at the dead of night went around our school like wildfire when I was a boy. People tended to talk a lot, and it was rumoured that the Erikson house was obviously haunted. People believed that one night the demonic activity got so bad and so aggressive in the house that the Eriksons simply fled. Everybody liked to talk about the Eriksons' house when I was a kid. People would make up crazy stories about ghosts and ghoulies that were probably lurking on the property. Before long, many of the locals were referring to the Erikson house as the haunted house. At first, me and my brother Gareth would talk together for ages about the subject, and what it was that could possibly have made the whole family up and leave in the middle of the night in the way that they obviously did. Your grandmother overheard our conversation, and told us that under no circumstances should we ever go near the Erikson family home. She said that if the rumours were even remotely true, it would be wise to keep away from the place." "So do you think Granny also thought the place was haunted?" I asked. "Well, I don't know about that. But she did tell us to stay away from the property. She thought something bad must have happened for the Eriksons to up and leave in the way they did in the middle of the night. My father said much the same at the time. He said, 'You heard your mother. You must listen to her advice. Don't go near the place if you know what's good for you.'" "Oh, dear me," said my mother. "Goodness gracious me, your parents were desperately naive. They were fueling the fire, weren't they? Stoking up the flames of encouragement. Did they not realize telling two teenagers not to do something will mean their teenagers will do just that?" "You're exactly right, sweetheart. That is what happened to me and Gareth. I guess our parents telling us to stay the hell away from the Erikson place, well, it stoked up our interest and curiosity. Me and my brother, being typical teenagers, were naturally fascinated and intrigued by anything remotely mysterious, so we decided to visit the house during the day. We knew the Eriksons had organized a removal company to clear out the house, so when we went to the place there was nothing there. Every room was empty. Nothing seemed remotely untoward. To tell you the truth, I was rather disappointed about that. The house didn't seem at all spooky. But then Gareth reminded me that it's often at night that ghostly activity is activated. He said to me, "You don't go to a haunted cemetery during the day, do you? Well, maybe some people do. But if you want to see something paranormal, then you have to go to the place at night, don't you?" That is when we both promptly decided that we would visit the Erikson house at night, and that is what we did. Something that your Uncle Gareth was later to very much regret. At this point, my father began wringing his hands together in a self-soothing gesture, almost as if it pained him to tell us his story. He paused for a moment, and then continued. "Well, Gareth set his alarm for 12 o'clock that night, so that he'd wake me up. We had decided we would clandestinely sneak out of the laundry room window and grab our bicycles from the shed, and then navigate our way down those sequestered country roads, cycling to the Erikson house, of course. Gareth was more excited than I was about this intrepid adventure. I was not so keen. as during the day our visit to the house had left me certain that the place was not remotely haunted. Even during the day you'd have expected a place reputed to being haunted to feel creepy and to pick up on some unsettling energy of some kind. But the Erickson house appeared benevolent and very calm, I think. I remember when my brother woke me up, I was very annoyed with him. He was telling me, "Get up! We're going to the haunted house." I begged him for us to take a rain check and turned over to go back to sleep. But Gareth was having none of that. So he went to the bathroom to get a bucket of cold water and threw it all over my face and body. I wasn't best pleased. "He did what?" asked my mother. "Well, he threw a bucket of cold water over my face and upper torso," said my father. "Good Lord! I guess you did wake up after that." "Well, I certainly did, and I wasn't remotely pleased. I actually cursed at Gareth. I suppose he was scared that if he didn't force me out of bed, that I would refuse to join him on our adventure. He was looking so forward to going to the Erickson property. I think he's always been fascinated about ghosts for as long as I could remember. Anyway, I had to get up at this point. I was shivering with the cold, soaked to the skin I was. Once I'd changed my soaking clothes, I was very much wide awake. I reluctantly agreed to go with Gareth. He was very excited, you know. He really was hoping that he'd have a paranormal encounter that night, and he had an admirable attitude on him of great expectation. I think he'd always longed to have a ghostly encounter. I was sure he'd be very disappointed when we came back home after visiting the Erickson house. But I didn't have the heart to crush his enthusiasm. I believed all the rumour-mongering at school about the Erickson place being haunted had been blown all out of proportion. But I could see Gareth absolutely believed the place was alive with paranormal activity. I'd never seen him look so enthusiastic before. His eyes were so animated. I remember telling him not to get his hopes up, because if we hadn't encountered anything strange at the Ericksons' house during the day, why would it not be the same at night? I don't think my brother and I had even got out of the house in the middle of the night like this, without our parents knowing about our whereabouts. Luckily, my mother and father were sound asleep in their beds at this time. We had 2 French bulldogs that could bark the place down potentially, if we made any noise in the house. But my brother had them in the barn. He'd put them in there earlier on in the evening, given them some food, and it seemed that they had been distracted by that and fallen fast asleep. They weren't making any noise. It was tenebrific that night, as in these parts there were no street lights, of course, only a scattering of farmhouses, all reasonably far apart, so the only thing we had were lights from our torches. I didn't feel any sense of trepidation or anxiety when we left the house, but Gareth was inflamed with excitement. He'd always been a lot more intuitive than I was. Maybe it's because he's always been more artistically inclined. He said he had a profound sense that tonight we would meet our very first ghost. "But why was Gareth so eager to encounter a ghost?" my mother asked. "I don't think you understand, darling, how completely titillated Gareth was about anything connected to the paranormal. He'd go to the library, take out library books. Some of them had pictures of so-called ghosts that had been caught on camera by accident. Gareth was so intrigued by all of this. He genuinely believed that the Ericksons' house was haunted, and that they had been driven away from their home in the middle of the night by an incensed ghost. And I suppose his inquiring mind wanted to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery, one way or another. But I was not so keen on this, I have to say." "So you weren't feeling the same sense of enthusiasm, were you?" my mother asked. "Absolutely not. In truth, while I was interested in subjects that involved some kind of mystery, I was cynical that ghosts actually existed. In truth, I thought we would return from our trip to the Ericksons' house very disappointed, as we had been during the day. I guess I was in for a rude awakening. I had no way of knowing that it wasn't ghosts I needed to worry about, but something infinitely more paradoxical and intriguing, that would not have crossed the blood-brain barrier of my thinking for a single second, let me tell you. Anyway, moving on with the story. Gareth and I crawled out of the window. Now, Gareth was very clever like that. He had literally taken part of the window apart. My parents knew nothing about this in the laundry. And we managed to get out of the bicycle shed, the 2 bicycles we had in there. The bicycle shed was full of lawn mowers, rowing boats, old paints and stuff like that. But we managed to remove the bicycles as noiselessly as we could. It was a full moon that night, and with the lights on our bicycles and with the assistance of the light from our torches, we managed to cycle down those country lanes. I'd never been cycling at night before, and I have to admit it was exhilarating. We were alone on this country road, you see, being serenaded by the sounds of crickets and frogs. And then there was the Milky Way, with its scattering of stars and luminescent light from the moon, that spilled over the road. So it was rather enchanting. There was a cool wind blowing, and it was wrestling with my sweater, nudging at the back of my neck. But I think the cycling helped me warm up considerably. We did finally reach our destination, which the family had abandoned a year before. So the house was still in very good condition, although the yard had become increasingly overgrown and rather neglected. We trampled awkwardly over the footpath that finally led to the front door. I suddenly, for reasons I cannot explain, felt very spooked. All I can say is I was hit with this overwhelming sense of foreboding, and a sense that somebody was watching us, that we were not alone. It was as if the Erickson place was cocooned by a foreboding sense of disquiet, such as we'd never encountered during the day. In that moment, I wondered if my brother was right, and if the Ericksons' house was possibly haunted after all. It was swaddled by tall, lofty trees on every side, of course, which you know, I'm sure. That's why it seemed so menacing, I suspect. I vividly recall a nasty chill running down the back of my spine. I got the overwhelming sense that we shouldn't be there. A little voice in my head was telling me to leave at once, that something was terribly wrong, that something was amiss. I kept turning around very nervously and looking behind me, with the light of my torch, and I would scan the trees, looking for any sign of movement. But all was still, and it was almost too quiet for comfort. I was convinced that something was standing behind one of the trees, watching us. But every time I turned around, which I did on numerous occasions, I must say, and I would flash my torchlight over the trees, but there was nothing there, which did make me feel a tad silly, as if I was overreacting about nothing. I was about to tell Gareth about my burgeoning reservations that left me feeling extremely uncomfortable, but he was otherwise preoccupied with getting into the house, and barely noticed my disquiet. I could see he was practically shaking with excitement. He looked at me and said with bright, shiny eyes, "I told you this place would be different at night. See, I was right. You can tell this place is definitely haunted. I can feel we're not alone. You feel it too?" I asked him. "Of course I feel it. I've got a great feeling we're going to see something tonight. Isn't that brilliant? I'm glad I persuaded you to come with me. You're not going to be disappointed, bro. Tonight we're going to encounter our first ghost. The same ghost that probably scared the Ericksons away from this property. Look, Gareth, I'm not sure that I want to see anything," I told him. "I think we should go back home, I really do. Something doesn't feel right about this place. Maybe it's a thrill for you to encounter a ghost, but I'm not sure I actually want to." Gareth glared at me. I've never seen him look at me the way he did that night. He snorted dismissively. "You're not going to let me down, bro. I won't let you. You hear me? This is an opportunity of a lifetime to see something others never get to see. And you want to turn it down? Are you completely insane?" "I'm not insane, Gareth," I told him. "I'm being sensible, aren't I? Something about the Erickson place is foreboding. It's like the house doesn't want us here. Oh, don't overreact, Peter. We're going to have an experience here tonight. You'll never forget it. And one day you'll thank me for it, I promise." I do remember the last time we visited the Erickson house during the day. We found the front door key lying under the mat. Gareth was now looking under the mat for the key, and he frowned. "The key's not here," he said. "Where is it?" I stepped forward and just automatically pushed the door. I couldn't believe it when it actually creaked open. Gareth's face broke into a big smile. "Well done, bro! I had no idea the house had been left open." Me and my brother gingerly entered the house. It only possessed a few scant furnishings, of course, that the Erickson family had left behind, for reasons I do not know. Perhaps these were things they no longer wanted. In the bedroom, which I guess must have belonged to Tony Erickson, there was a large worn-out bureau. I do remember, very clearly, although I don't know if it's still there, of course, but on the surface of the bureau was this huge concrete-shaped object. It was very intriguing. It looked like an antique covered in dust, and was on display next to some interesting shells, stones, pieces of driftwood, some old pennies, and some rusty-looking things, which looked pretty antique as well. So I guessed that Tony had collected these things for himself, but had left them behind in the house. I was very tempted to take that large, antique-shaped object back home with me, but I knew it didn't belong to me, so I couldn't do that. I was surprised the family left such a lovely piece of furniture behind in terms of the antique bureau. We went around the house, and everything seemed benign, and just as it should be. I wondered why we'd bothered to come here. In the first place, the feeling of being haunted had suddenly abandoned me the moment we'd entered the house. In truth, the interior felt no different to how it had felt during the day, and there was nothing spooky about the place that would lead me to believe it was haunted. I was about to tell this to my brother, and that our plan in coming here had been futile after all. And if we wanted to have some ghost-like interaction, we'd be better off going to a cemetery or playing with a Ouija board, although the latter would have creeped me out for sure, as playing with a Ouija board would scare me, because you can call up things into our reality that you might not be able to finally get rid of. It was as I was thinking this, there was this massive banging on the front door. It was so earth-shatteringly loud, it would have made the banging that Mrs. Sanderson made on our door the other night seem almost mute. It was to date possibly the most terrifying sound I have ever heard, as if we were being ambushed by some dangerous thugs. Gareth, of course, went as white as a sheet, the colour completely drained from his skin. I've never seen him look like that before. The torch he was holding nearly slipped out of his hand like butter, because he practically jumped out of his skin. "What the hell? Did you hear that, Peter? Someone's at the door! Someone's at the door! And whoever they are, they don't sound remotely friendly. I'm really scared. I'm really scared, Peter. You're right. We shouldn't have come here." "Shh," I said. "Don't make a sound. We don't want them to know we're here, do we?" Me and my brother were looking for somewhere to hide. We ran towards some velvety-looking curtains in the living room and hid behind them. We knew that whoever was knocking at the door could easily come in if they pushed it open, so we felt somewhat cornered, for there was nowhere to escape, and very little places to hide in a house that was empty of all its furnishings, and let's just say all the windows were far too small to squeeze through for us. I guess we sensed we were in imminent danger. That was when we heard the door violently being thrust open. We could hear ominous movements in the house, shuffling, heavy feet thumping across the wooden floors, and it didn't just sound like one pair of feet, but it sounded like several, and those feet were moving towards us, and it made me want to wet myself, let me tell you. I surreptitiously took a peek behind the curtain, and that was when I saw these massive forms moving around the house, clearly looking for us. I couldn't identify what these things were, but they were humongous in size and stature, and I was intimidated. Let me tell you, I really did believe we were toast. I wanted to run out of that house as fast as I possibly could, by heading straight for the door, but I was too terrified. I couldn't even flinch. I was unable to move a muscle. It was almost like my feet were anchored to one spot, like a boat in its mooring place. My body shook like a leaf, my teeth chattered, and my heart thundered in my ears. When I glanced over at Gareth, his eyes were earnestly wide. They took up his entire face. He was trembling uncontrollably, so much so that the wooden floors beneath his feet began to vibrate and groan, which gave away our hiding place, I'm most sure. These beings, whatever they were, appeared to me to be like giant shadow people. They were indistinct, so to speak. I think that me and Gareth instinctively knew that these shadow beings were looking for us. And then the worst thing happened, the worst thing imaginable. The feet started to move towards us. In that quintessential moment, I closed my eyes ever so tightly. I was terribly afraid of what I would see or what would happen next. In truth, I was sure that me and Gareth were both dead, and that we'd never get to leave the Erickson house in the same way that we had entered it. Then one of those shadow beings ripped the curtain back. I could hear a tearing sound, and there were 4 gargantuan figures standing side by side, along with 4 pairs of eyes. I couldn't see them very clearly, but they began to yell at us in what appeared to be an incomprehensible language of sorts. But I felt they were telling us to get the hell out. Ninata! 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 I could see these black eyes glaring at us furiously. They gave off this red eye shine. These things were intimidating, let me tell you. I could barely move, not even flinch. I was beyond petrified. Me and Gareth were looking at 4 very huge Bigfoot. They were not remotely friendly towards us. They seemed angry. They kept shouting one word at us again and again, which I'm pretty sure meant "get out." I thought they would lash out at us and strike us, harm us in some way. But they continued to yell at us. They pounded their fists against their chests, which so often is seen in silverback gorillas in the wild, when they're expressing their dominance, or extreme indignance, I suspect. One of the Bigfoots grabbed me impulsively by the collar. He thrust me forward, and then grabbed my brother and did the same, pushing us across the floor. And that was when we didn't need further encouragement. We ran like greased lightning through the house, out of the front door. I've never been so afraid. I ran for my life like I've never run before. I'm glad to say that the adrenaline finally did kick in, although it was taking its time for sure. These 4 Bigfoot began chasing after us, and shouting in this strange language. It was like they were deliberately trying to scare us half to death. But the funny thing is, they never harmed us, and they easily could have done so. I do not know why they pursued us like this, but my only feeling was that they wanted us to stay the hell away from the Ericksons' house. When we got on our bicycles, they stood there watching us very silently. They stopped chasing us, and in that moment, the leader shouted something out after us. I knew it was the leader because he was so much bigger than the other 3 Bigfoot, and I think he was saying, "Don't ever come back if you know what's good for you." I was not sure if these Bigfoots were territorial, or what their problem was, as they weren't happy with us entering the Erickson house, for reasons I do not understand. I'm pretty sure these sizable Bigfoot drove the Ericksons away from their property, as they abandoned their house and never came back, and now they were chasing us off the property in the same way. Me and my brother instinctively bounced onto our bicycles and cycled back home at a speed I've never been able to replicate since. I don't think either of us could believe what had happened. I barely remember that cycle ride home. It was a blur to me, let me tell you. Anyway, I was just so shocked and traumatized by the event, but my brother was much more so than I was. He told me not to speak of the matter ever again. I told him that if the Bigfoots had intended to harm us, they could have done so already, but he didn't want to talk about it at all. He completely shut me down. He said, "Bigfoots don't exist, and this never ever happened. And if you say it did, I will deny it and tell everyone you're a big fat liar. We're never going to talk about this again. Do you understand, Peter?" "But why?" I asked him. "Why don't you want to talk about what happened?" Gareth grabbed me by the collar and shook me violently hard. I nearly lost my balance, let me tell you. "Don't you dare tell anyone what happened tonight. I don't want to speak of this matter again." My mother did ask me what was up with Gareth, He was behaving very strangely after that event, locking himself up in his bedroom for hours on end, refusing to talk to anyone. For a long time he slipped into a deep depression and pretty much ignored both friends and family. My mother sent him to a counsellor, and that was when he confessed to my parents that he was gay. My mother said she always assumed that Gareth was gay, and it had never bothered her in the slightest. So she put down his strange, sulky behaviour, down to the fact that he'd been reluctant to admit of his sexual orientation for so long. But I didn't buy that for a single second. I knew what had really traumatized my brother, but we never spoke of the paradoxical experience again, and I know if I had done so he would have shut me down in an instant and told me I was talking all but nonsense. Gareth is like that, you see. If he doesn't want you to talk about something that has upset him, he'll completely clam up. I know you know him as this gregarious, effervescent individual, but there is a side of him that is extremely secretive, and if he doesn't want to talk about something that has upset him in the past, he'll just close down, let me tell you." "Goodness gracious me," said my mother. "Poor Gareth. He didn't take the encounter with the Bigfoots well, did he? But I can't say I blame him. In the same situation I would have been terrified myself. It's all rather ironic, isn't it? He was so dreadfully excited about your adventure that night, and then everything went completely pear-shaped for the two of you, when you were both chased away from the Erickson property by 4 burly Bigfoot that didn't seem best pleased with you. That would have terrified anyone, I'm most sure. It's a remarkable story you've shared with us tonight, Peter, but I wish you'd told us about this a long time ago. If it makes you feel any better, I am certain that those Bigfoots did not want to harm you or your brother, because if they had wanted to, they could have done so, and they didn't. But they did seem to want to drive you away from the Erickson property, and the big question is, why? "Maybe they're territorial," I said. "Perhaps they want the place to themselves." "That is a possibility, Ernest," my mother admitted. "You do get animals that are territorial, and people as well. So there's no reason why Bigfoot shouldn't be territorial. But personally, I would have thought creatures such as Bigfoot would move around, following food and water sources. Why would they become attached to somebody's house? I'm not sure what the Bigfoot were after that night. But I'm certain of one thing, Peter, that you and your brother were not in danger. If they'd meant to harm you, they would have done so. I mean, think about Mrs. Sandelson's encounter for a moment. Now, she wasn't harmed in any way, was she? The Bigfoot actually leapt to her defense, attacked that wolf-like humanoid, and told her to go away. Perhaps the Bigfoot were being protective towards you and your brother." "Well, I don't know what happened that night, and I have to accept the fact that I'll never understand it," said my father. "But you're right. If the Bigfoot had wanted to harm us, they'd have probably done so." "It's your brother Gareth I feel so desperately sorry for," my mother said reflectively. "It's not good for him to bury his trauma away like this. I wish he'd talk about his experience to someone. It might make him feel a whole lot better." "Don't you dare do a thing like that, darling. You might think you know my brother well, but if you ask him about his Bigfoot encounter, he won't be happy at all. I'm in no doubt he will deny it even happened. I think he buried the memory away for good reason. I don't think it would be wise to bring the subject up to him. He won't be impressed. He'll think I betrayed his trust. As far as he is concerned, it never happened, and that's the way he wants it to stay. Gareth may be all out there with his effusive gestures, and his clientele all but love him. But they don't know that there is another side to Gareth, a side that nobody else knows except for me." As you can imagine, for me and my brother William, after hearing about my father's incredulous encounter with 4 very burly Bigfoot, we became increasingly fascinated about the Erickson property, a subject that we'd never been interested in before. The house was situated a short cycle ride from our home. I think over the years we'd pretty much ignored the old abandoned place, although I think we did look at the property at one point in time very briefly in passing. But after my father's story, Our interest in the place was piqued. I had known about the Ericsons abandoning their property all those years ago, and never returning. I had learnt that they had sent some removal men to pick up some furniture, knickknacks and clothes, but for some reason they'd never removed the worn-out bureau from their son's bedroom, which in itself was profoundly odd, as that bureau was a valuable piece of furniture, and I'd seen it myself when visiting the house a few years earlier. By all accounts, when me and my brother were alone together, we would often talk about my father's paradoxical encounter with 4 very lofty Bigfoot. The more we reflected over the story, the more intrigued we naturally became. Why were 4 Bigfoot dead set on driving my father and Uncle Gareth away from an abandoned property? Why were they so fixated on this place? "Mum's right," said my brother William. "There's no way those Bigfoot intended to harm Dad and Uncle Gareth. If that were the case, they would be dead by now, and we'd never have been born, and that's a horrible thought. And then Dad would never have met Mum. Your Dad and Gareth were physically dragged away from the curtains and pushed towards the front door. That's a clear sign to me that the Bigfoot wanted them to leave. In those vital seconds, they could have been killed, but they weren't. Think about it for a moment. The Ericsons were frightened away from their home, deliberately. Mum's right. Those Bigfoot scared them away from the property. But the big question is, why would they do that? That's what I want to know. What is so special about the Ericson place?" "By Jove, you're right, William. I hadn't thought of that before. Those Bigfoot wanted them out. They purposely drove them away, rather like a sheepdog driving away a wandering sheep, so that it returns safely back to the herd." "I have an idea," said William, "but I'm not sure you're going to like it, Ernest. You are rather inclined to be a little freaked out by things, but I'm going to say it anyway." "What's that supposed to mean?" I said rather indignantly. "Are you suggesting I'm a wuss or something?" "I'm not saying that," said William, "but you are a lot more cautious than I am. You have to admit that." "That may be true, but I'm still not a wuss. What is this idea of yours?" "How badly do you want to see a Bigfoot?" my brother asked, his eyes growing wide. "I'm sorry to burst your bubble, William, but I don't want to see a Bigfoot. Dad's experience is enough for me. He had a hell of a time when he encountered those 4 burly Bigfoot, and I wouldn't like the same thing to happen to me. It would freak me out. Look at Uncle Gareth. He's sitting on a secret that he refuses to talk about, refuses to admit even happened. I mean, that is how affected he is by that encounter. And you're suggesting I'd want one?" "Well, if I saw a Bigfoot," said my brother, "I'd keep the encounter to myself, of course I would. I wouldn't be stupid enough to share my story with anyone else. You know what people are like. They'd laugh at you, think you were making it up as you were going along. People can be so cynical, you know. Some secrets are best not shared, and this is one of them. I can fully understand why Dad didn't even want to share his Bigfoot encounter with Mum. He's been sitting on this secret for years. The only reason he shared his story with us was because Mrs. Sanderson had an absurd encounter with a Bigfoot, and he wanted us to know that she wasn't lying about it. So do you want to see a Bigfoot or not?" "No, I don't," I said. "Of course I believe they exist. I know they're real because of Dad's encounter. But I'm sorry, I don't want to have an encounter of my own. After what Dad told us, no thank you very much." "So you're a wuss then," said my brother. "You must be one of the most unadventurous people I know." "That's not fair, William. I'm not a wuss, and I resent you implying that I am one. If I say I don't want to see a Bigfoot, it's not because I'm a wuss. It's because I don't fancy having an encounter with that creature. Is that so hard for you to understand?" "What's wrong with you, bro? I'm younger than you, and I've got more balls in my right toe than you have in your entire body." "That's not true. I've got balls," I said, knowing even as my brother told me this, that he was absolutely right. I was actually a coward. "Then prove it, bro. Let me see how big your balls actually are," William challenged me. "So what is it you want me to do to prove I'm not a wuss?" I said, sarcastically rolling my eyes. "Ah, let me guess. I think I've got you figured out. You want us to follow in Dad and Uncle Gareth's footsteps, don't you? You want us to go exploring the Ericksons' house in the middle of the night like they did all those years ago. But I'm sorry, that's not going to happen, William. No way is that going to happen. I'm not going to go with you, period. Not because I'm a wuss, but because I've actually got some common sense. See, I told you, you're a wuss, said my brother. No, I'm not, I said defensively. Well then, prove it to me. Show me that you're not. I tell you what we'll do. We can repeat what Dad and Gareth did all those years ago. We'll go to the Erickson house in the middle of the night and see whether any Bigfoot comes after us to turf us out of the house. Are you insane, William? Surely you know if you play with fire you're going to get burnt. Everybody knows that, I said. Look, bro, there's no guarantee we'll encounter a Bigfoot, like Uncle Gareth and Dad did all those years ago. But as far as I'm concerned, if we visit the abandoned property in the middle of the night, we have a greater opportunity to encounter something than at any other place around here. The Bigfoots didn't want the Ericksons in that house for some reason, nor did they want Dad and Gareth all those years ago. So there has to be a reason why they want to turf everybody away from the place. We should go and investigate it, don't you think? You're kidding me, William. You really want us to go and investigate the Erickson property, do you? You really want to have another encounter with a Bigfoot like Dad did all those years ago? I don't think so, I said, shaking my head furiously. I don't fancy being chased away from the property by a team of Bigfoot. Are you kidding me? See, I told you you're a wuss, said my brother. I might have known you were far too lame to consider taking on an adventure like this. You're so predictable. We probably wouldn't even encounter a Bigfoot. But if we don't go exploring, then we won't even have a chance to encounter anything. You heard about Mrs. Sandalson's encounter the other night. The Bigfoot never harmed her, did he? It means that Bigfoot are in this area. The 4 Bigfoot Dad and Uncle Gareth encountered didn't harm them either. So what do we have to worry about? The worst that can happen is we'll be chased away from the Erickson property. And I'm up for that. Well, I'm glad you think that's cool. I certainly don't. You've got a warped idea about what cool is. Those Bigfoots seriously harmed Uncle Gareth, I may remind you. Emotionally. Think about it. He doesn't ever talk about his encounter. He was spooked by the event. He told Dad that he's going to pretend it never happened. Gareth went completely grey at a young age. And my bet it's because of the encounter he had with those Bigfoots. It's not something you should trivialise, you know. Don't you get it? My brother said indignantly. The Bigfoot Mrs. Sandalson encountered saved her from that wolf man. He told her to go. It's obvious he never intended to harm her. Get that into your thick head, will you? On the contrary, he may actually have saved her life. If that wolfman had caught up with Mrs. Sandalson, who had shot at him and provoked the creature to anger, she might not be here anymore. You do realise that, don't you? So you really want us to go out and check if the... I get where you're going with this, Ernest. You seem convinced the Bigfoots that Dad and Uncle Gareth encountered meant them no harm. You feel the same way about Mrs. Sandalson's encounter. And what you say makes sense, but it doesn't mean you're right about any of this. Do you really want to take the risk of having an encounter with a creature you know nothing about, that could potentially be extremely dangerous and do us some serious harm? Even if the harm is not physical, it could be an emotional kind of harm. If there are Bigfoots still territorial hanging around the Erickson place, do you really want to provoke them to anger by going there at midnight? What if they chase us away like they did Dad and Uncle Gareth all those years ago? Come on, Ernest. I very much doubt we're going to have a similar experience to Dad and Uncle Gareth. Maybe we will experience nothing at all. It's been a long time since Dad was a teenager. Those Bigfoots are probably long gone by now. But even if they're not, are you really going to miss out on an opportunity of experiencing a chance encounter? Think about it. We don't have to chase after a Bigfoot. The Bigfoot may come to us to shoo us away from the Erickson property. It doesn't get better than that, does it? Do you realise how many people out there would kill for a chance encounter with a Bigfoot? But they never get to see one, and probably never will. Imagine if we have an amazing story to one day tell our grandchildren. Anyway, if the truth be told, life is about taking risks, isn't it? Everybody knows that. No one ever accomplished anything in life by hiding away from its challenges. The most successful people in this world embrace challenges head on, don't they? Maybe that's true, but this is different, I said. Embracing 4 powerful Bigfoot while exploring the Erickson property, I'm afraid, is not my idea of a fun time. I'm sorry, but it's not. I don't want any of that. If I embrace a kind of adventure, it would be something like whitewater rafting or rock climbing. But provoking Bigfoot to anger, that's not fun. My bet is we won't encounter anything, said William. I meant it, Ernest. I think it's highly doubtful anything will actually happen. I mean, Dad's Bigfoot encounter happened years ago, didn't it? I doubt anyone goes near the Ericksons' abandoned house these days. But even so, I'm still going to go there one night in a couple of weeks' time, after I've finished my school project, to see if anything happens. You don't have to come with me if you don't want to, but I would appreciate you not telling Mum and Dad about this intrepid plan of mine. You know, Mum, she'd likely freak out. And, well, Dad, he wouldn't be best pleased, would he? But you can't go alone to that house in the middle of the night, I protested. That's insane, absolutely insane. Are you crazy? But I can go, Ernest, and I will go, my brother said stubbornly. And I could tell by the resolute determination on his face that there was nothing I could possibly say that would ever change his mind on this matter. My brother could be incorrigible, and there were times there was no reasoning with him. I suspected he had taken after Uncle Gareth in that regard, although instead of being fixated over the subject of the paranormal, he was fascinated by cryptid creatures, especially Bigfoot. I had seen his fascination in the woodgrove when we encountered the dead body of the wolf-man, that in later years I rather suspect was actually a dog-man. My brother locked eyes with me and said to me very firmly, "Even if you don't want a potential encounter with a Bigfoot, I do. And if you don't come with me, then I'll go alone. It's as simple as that." "Oh, so there you go again. You're trying to manipulate me, aren't you?" I said, feeling infuriated with my brother, so much so that my cheeks began to burn. "Is that where this is heading? It's so typical of you to be like this, William. How can I be expected to sleep at night if I know you're hanging around an abandoned house in the middle of the night, hoping to be chased away by a team of surly Bigfoot? What on earth is wrong with you? You're not normal." "I'm not manipulating you, Ernest," my brother said. "I'm telling you my plans. And if you don't like them, tough titty, I'm not forcing you to come with me, am I?" "But you can't go there alone, William. That's insane. You know it is." "Well, you can come with me if it makes you feel any better," said my brother with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I intend to go to the Erickson house in a couple of weeks' time, with or without you." All right, I said. "I'll come with you, only because I'd never ever forgive myself if something untoward were to happen to you. I want you to know I'm not happy about this. For a start, I think it's very unlikely that what happened to Dad and Uncle Gareth will happen to us. But even if it does, I don't think you're going to enjoy being challenged by 4 aggressive Bigfoot. You're making light of these cryptid creatures. You've romanticized them in your mind, as if these creatures cannot be feared. But you have no idea about how potentially dangerous they could be. You're in denial, aren't you?" "I'm not in denial, Ernest. I'm interested in paradoxical things, always have been. And yes, I would like a Bigfoot encounter. I'm not completely weird, you know. There are lots of people out there, just like me, seeking out an encounter with Bigfoot. If they knew about the Erickson place and what had happened there to Uncle Gareth and Dad, I bet you they'd investigate the place for themselves like I intend to do. I mean, if you can't find Bigfoot, let him come to you. That's what I say." "Honestly, I can't believe anybody would be as fanatical as you," I said to my brother. "So you will come, then, on this intrepid adventure of mine, will you? To the Erickson house?" my brother asked me. "Is this your roundabout way of saying yes, William?" "I told you I would come, didn't I?" I said, feeling the back of my throat beginning to constrict, almost as if the air was being sucked out of my lungs. Just thinking of potentially encountering a Bigfoot scared me half to death. But being the older brother in my family, I knew I needed to lead by example. I should be the brother that showed no fear at all, even if I was feeling it. But it was exceedingly difficult to hide my trepidation about what my brother was proposing to do. I certainly didn't want him in the dead of night going to visit the Erickson house on his own, given what had happened to my father and to Uncle Gareth all those years ago. So it certainly didn't sit well with me, thinking of my brother exploring that abandoned house, while I lay in bed tossing and turning, wondering if he'd got himself ensnared in some kind of trouble. I really felt that I was now stuck between a rock and a hard place. My only hope was that my brother would decide that going exploring the Erickson house was a futile idea, and that he would soon lose interest in it. But I had completely underestimated my brother. William at the time was doing a school project, I'm glad to say, that needed to be completed, and it took up the lion's share of his time and attention. So it would seem our little adventure to the Erickson property had been put on the back burner and postponed. After 2 weeks had chugged by, with my brother not expressing any keen interest in visiting the abandoned property, I began to finally draw in some fresh air, reassuring myself that my brother was having second thoughts, and at long last had come to his senses. William was obstinately stubborn by nature, but unbeknown to me, he had been researching everything Bigfoot in his spare time, so his interest in the cryptid creature intensified exponentially. I was the oldest brother by about 18 months. I will say this about my brother William, to his credit. He was much more plucky and courageous than I was. When he was growing up, he was never afraid of the dark, and as a teenager, when we would watch horror movies together, William never became squeamish when the characters in the movie were involved in a terrifying scene that would make most people cover up their eyes and recoil in horror. William loved all things adventurous, and if it meant that you could potentially lose your life undertaking something challenging, then as far as he was concerned, it was all the more thrilling. It was like my brother lived on his adrenaline and got a great rush out of being scared stiff. So yes, much as I hate to admit this, he was a whole lot braver than I was. One day William took me aside and seemed desperately excited about something. At this point I'd all but forgotten about the Erickson property and the nightly adventure my brother had been planning for quite a while, as I had told myself that it would never happen. "What's going on?" I asked him. "Why are you looking so pleased with yourself?" "I've finished my project," he told me, a light going on in his eyes. "So tonight's the night." At this point my heart sank in my chest, because this is not what I wanted to hear, and I didn't have to ask my brother what he meant, because those words were already sticking in the back of my throat, and they actually made me want to gag. "Are you sure it's a good idea, William?" I asked him. "Can't we take a rain check on this? I'm sure you must have noticed the weather is getting a lot cooler recently," I said, trying to discourage William. "It could be cold out there in the late hours of the night, don't you think?" William chuckled. He pointed an amused finger at me. "You're good, Ernest, you really are. I'll give you that. If someone was given the #1 prize for procrastination or avoidance strategies, you'd likely win it. You've never minded cold weather before. It's the beginning of autumn, Ernest. It's not going to kill us sneaking out of the house at this time of year. You promised you'd come with me. I don't really want to go alone, but if I don't have your support, then I will do just that. And I'm not trying to manipulate you either, but I would appreciate your company, because I enjoy hanging around with you. But if you don't want to come with me, I quite understand." "I told you I would come with you, didn't I?" I said rather begrudgingly. "I just think you need to be realistic. You need to realize it's very unlikely we'll encounter a Bigfoot." I think I was saying this more to myself than to my brother, to reassure myself that our nightly adventure would of course be very uneventful. "Then what are you worried about?" said William, slapping me on the back affectionately. "If we don't encounter anything, all well and good. We wouldn't have lost, nor would we have gained anything. Only a little light exercise on our bikes, that's all. And there's nothing wrong with that, is there? That evening when we retired to bed, I don't mind admitting that I was exceedingly nervous. I was very afraid of what the night would bring. I had an ominous feeling that history might repeat itself, and that me and my brother would have an encounter with 4 irate, Titanic-sized Bigfoot. What if those creatures were still around? The very thought made me want to heave. Something deep down in my gut that was making me feel decidedly nauseous was telling me a trip to the abandoned Erickson property at the dead of night was likely not a good idea. We hadn't visited the place in many years, and had no idea what it would be like now. When my father was a teenager, the house was in relatively good condition, so when he and Uncle Gareth visited the place, hoping to have some kind of supernatural experience with a ghostly entity, they had been bitterly disappointed, for the house appeared so benevolent. My father had described it as feeling boringly mundane, as it didn't feel or even look like a haunted house. I rather suspected that with the passage of time, things would have changed significantly, as the Erickson house had fallen into a deep decay, rather like a decomposing skeleton. So it wouldn't feel so benevolent this time, I was most sure, for the natural world would have done a good job in making the place look all the more sinister, as burgeoning ivies would likely be strangling the very foundations of the house, creeping through cracks in the walls, while thorny weeds and overgrown grasses would likely monopolize the property in a tangled chaos that would be far from pretty. I knew a crumbling house like this may have many problems and could potentially be dangerous, especially if part of the roof fell down or something like that. I knew that the house, being in a ramshackle state, would likely rarely feel like a haunted house, so going there at the witching hour would be more than a little disquieting. But I did not express these misgivings with my brother. There would be no point in doing that. He'd think I was looking for excuses to abandon our nightly soiree. And in truth that is exactly what I was attempting to do, as I would have given almost anything to discourage him from this trip. As a teenager I had never once left our house in the middle of the night to go exploring, so this would be a first for me. I was exceedingly apprehensive about what the night would ultimately bring. So much so that when it was about 10 o'clock, I cautiously slipped into my brother's bedroom, and when I discovered he was sound asleep, I sneakily grabbed his cell phone on his nightstand, which thankfully was unlocked, and I changed the alarm so that instead of going off at 12 o'clock, it would go off at 6:30 in the morning. I sneaked out of his room, feeling extremely proud of myself, because we wouldn't be going to the abandoned house after all, as my brother's alarm clock would awaken him much later in the morning, and by then it would be too late to go off on this ridiculous adventure that my brother had planned. I went to bed feeling reassured that everything would be put on hold. Imagine my surprise when at 12 o'clock my brother was shaking me so vigorously that I woke with a start. "What are you doing, William?" I asked him. "What's going on?" "Have you forgotten?" said William rather cheekily. "We're going to the Erickson house tonight, aren't we? It's 12 o'clock. I'm waking you up. Get dressed and put something warm on. By the way, nice try. I saw you trying to reset my alarm clock on my cell phone so that I wouldn't wake up at the right time. But you underestimated me, Ernest. You forget I'm excited about this trip. Sorry, but your plan didn't work. I figured you'd do something sneaky like this. Turns out I was right. So I went to bed with one eye half open. One thing you are, Ernest, is extremely predictable. I've always said that about you. But I really don't want to do this, William," I said nervously. "Can't we take a rain check? Do it another time, perhaps. I think I feel one of my headaches coming on." "Nice try, Ernest. You sound exactly like Mum when she doesn't want to do something. No one is forcing you to come with me. I'll go alone if I must." "But you know I can't let you go alone," I grumbled. "Good," said my brother, with a cheeky grin on his face. "Now get your clothes on, and we'll sneak outside the laundry window. I've prepared it. I've bent the bar back, so we can squeeze through it quite easily. Don't worry, our adventure will be over soon, and we won't ever have to do it again, if it comes to nothing, and that's a promise." "Oh, that is reassuring," I said sarcastically. "What about the dogs?" I asked suddenly, delighted with the thought that both Rascal and Dash, our two adorable mixed-breed dogs, who slept in the kitchen, would likely make a noise if we left the house in the middle of the night. Their barking would almost certainly get the attention of my father, who would wake up from his slumber, dashing down the staircase with a rifle in his hands, expecting to apprehend an intruder, only to find me and my brother clandestinely sneaking out of the house by way of the laundry window, like two prowling burglars that were up to no good. I knew my father would never under any circumstances allow us to go out in the middle of the night like this, especially if he knew we were retracing his footsteps when he'd been a teenager, in the hope of encountering a Bigfoot like he had done all those years before. If he had an inkling of what we were up to, he would quite literally have lost it with us, because even after all these years, his encounter with the Bigfoots had shaken him to the core, and I don't think he ever got over it. "Oh, that's all sorted," said my brother. "I've given Dash and Rascal bones to keep them busy. They won't make a noise when we leave. They'll be too preoccupied with their chewing. I gave them the bones a moment ago, and they're very distracted. You know what those two are like about bones." My brother had it all figured out perfectly, as I knew he was right. Our two dogs, when they started chewing bones, would never make a commotion, even when we left the house, as once they got their teeth into those juicy bones, their attention would be engaged otherwise, and we could jump on the roof to our heart's content, and they would be unlikely to even acknowledge us. I will admit that when me and William left our parents' house that night, after successfully sneaking through the laundry window, I was clandestinely praying that my father would get up and our cover would be blown. I would rather face his wrath than embrace the unknown. I could imagine my father storming into the laundry room with a formidable glare on his face, asking us what the hell we thought we were doing. But that sadly never happened. I knew unequivocally our father would not allow us to go off on a nightly soiree like this, as my parents were reasonably strict and expected us to be in bed by 10:30, as they were determined that we would get good grades at school, which wouldn't happen if we were sleep-deprived. Unfortunately, luck was not on my side that night, for my parents failed to wake up, even though my father was a reasonably light sleeper. The dogs did not bark, and nothing appeared to give us away, almost as if the night itself was bearing our secret away, rather like a squirrel with its acorns, encouraging us to merge seamlessly with the ghostly shadows that ubiquitously haunt the witching hours. Me and William wasted no time when we were greeted by the nudges of chilly air. We grabbed our bicycles from the yard shed, and with clumsy, rather ungainly movements, made a substantial amount of rattling noises, as moving bicycles from a shed is never an easy endeavour. Alas, the noises we made didn't cause any lights in our home to suddenly go on, or for the indistinct silhouette of my father to lean out of the upstairs bedroom window and look out at the night to see what was going on. For had he done that, he'd have likely seen some suspicious movements and come downstairs at once to investigate, with his hunting rifle at the ready. None of this happened. All seemed very quiet and subdued, as if the night was holding its breath, so that we could be cloaked in its tenebrific fog that seemed to be swallowing us whole, for the darkness was clinging to us like the ethereal strings of a spider web. Moments later we were out on the road, our torches illuminating the road ahead. At this point I was very much wide awake and alert. My only thought was that I wanted to get this trip to the abandoned Erickson property over and done with once and for all. And once it was over, I hoped my younger brother would never bug me again when he came to the realization that our visit to the abandoned property had been very unfruitful, apart from robbing us of a good night's sleep. On the bike ride, I kept reassuring myself that nothing untoward would ever happen, but I couldn't shake off an ominous feeling that began to creep up from the pit of my stomach to the back of my throat, like a rather rapid-growing viral infection. It was so dark on our bicycle ride, so I was thankful that our torches cast the dark curtains of fog away, so that we could see our way clearly. But when I glanced towards the trees that fringed both sides of the dusty road, I could feel a heaviness enveloping my heart. I didn't want to be doing this. Ostensibly, The Milky Way wasn't ungenerous. I mean, there was a resplendent glaze of silvery glitter in the sky, and a moon did come out to dance once in a while, like a bride on her wedding day, wearing a shimmering ivory gown. So the night wasn't as intimidating as it could have been, although it was still extremely dark and oppressive. Where we lived at the time, the properties were far apart, most situated on sizable plots of land. Some people happened to own horses, so we lived in an area with a lot of friendly horse riding and ATV trails. For me personally, it seemed to take an age to get to the Ericksons' abandoned house. Every minute seemed to last like a lifetime. Soon we were cycling down the long overgrown driveway, through the trees where things got significantly darker, for the overhang blocked out the moonlight and stole away some of the light of our torches. So even though we'd reached our due destination, this part of the ride had been far from pleasant. The Erickson house was so much worse than I could have ever envisaged it to be. It was hard to believe that a decrepit, dilapidated house like this had once been a delightful family home. For even though the darkness skillfully hid many of its obvious imperfections, I could see that the house was rapidly descending into rampant decay. I couldn't help but think how sad it was that the Ericksons had allowed this to happen. It rather felt as if me and my brother William were standing in a space that was so sadly forgotten by time, lost in its own tragic melancholia. When my father had visited the Erickson property all those years ago as a teenager, the house had been in reasonably good condition. He told me and my brother that there had been nothing spooky or unsettling about the place, so much so they emphatically believed that such a benign house could not be haunted at all. But how different things were now, for the hands of time had done little to soften the ambience of the house. It stood before us like a dishevelled old woman, wearing pitiful rags under the soft prisms of moonlight. It was haunting. The rambling creepers that climbed across the walls with their angry tentacles stuffed their gnarled, grubby fingers through areas of the roof and windows, making the house appear all the more menacing and extremely unapproachable. It felt as if hostile, malevolent eyes were indignantly watching us from behind dusty windows that were covered in cobwebs, while wooden panels that framed the windows appeared diseased and ravaged by damp. I was glad I couldn't see the true extent of this excessive decay, for the night had rendered it less fierce. But nevertheless an uncertainty began to claw at my throat. My heart thundered violently in my ears, for there was something about the house that was so sinister, so desperately unwelcoming. A little voice in my gut was nudging me and warning me to stay well away. But expressing those thoughts to my brother would be pointless. I had to go through this crazy adventure with him, but never again, I told myself very firmly. "It looks like a haunted house," I said to my brother. "I really don't want to go in there. I'm not sure it'll be safe. The place is falling apart. Let's go home. Please, let's go home." "Oh, change the record, Ernest, will you? Here we go again. You're so predictable," said my brother sarcastically, rolling his eyes in exasperation. "Are you a pussycat or what? You promised you would come with me tonight. I told you I'd never ask you again. It's a once-only favour. And you're here now, so we might as well go through with this. Calm down," he said, slapping me across the back, as if I was a kid that needed some encouragement. I didn't appreciate being patronised and belittled like this, but I bit my lip and said nothing. There was no point in having an argument with my brother. "I'm sure you can do this, Ernest," he said to me encouragingly. "Something just doesn't feel right, William," I said. "Good, I'm glad you feel like that. I feel it too. Maybe we'll have a Bigfoot encounter after all. You know what people say about Bigfoot encounters? That something doesn't feel right, and then voila, it happens. They encounter the creature. That could be our story tonight." "If we don't encounter Bigfoot," I said sarcastically, "we may have an encounter with a leaky roof or some treacherous damp floorboards that are determined to eat at our feet." "We'll be careful," said my brother. "Come on, let's find the door. Everything is so desperately overgrown, it's hard to see it." We did eventually find the door, covered in burgeoning ivy, which was keeping it firmly closed by heavy vines. but we began to rip them away, and my brother kicked at the door, and parts of the door came apart. The wood was so rotted. The door flung open with a mighty creak, and then we were in the empty house. I was glad most of the furniture had been removed a long time ago, but the walls were peeling. The house smelt musty and damp. The curtains on the windows were torn to shreds. Everywhere we walked, the floorboards beneath us creaked and groaned. Cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and the corners of the walls began to tickle at our faces. I nearly screamed when a couple of rats scurried away from us. "I don't like it in here one bit," I told my brother nervously. "That's the point of this adventure, Ernest. It's not meant to be enjoyable. It's an experience to be spooked out of our minds. That's why we're here right now." Moments later we entered what I assume was Tony Erickson's bedroom, when he had been a young boy. There was no furniture in the room, other than what probably was a quality worn-out bureau at one stage, but it appeared to be falling apart, and was thickly caked in dust, so all the objects on display looked as if they were buried under desert sand. "Remember Dad telling us about the strange stone artifact on display on the bureau? I wonder what it is. It looks very interesting, don't you think? Like something you might find in a war zone." "It's still here," said my brother. "I wonder what Dad would think if he was to come back here again." Me and my brother started exploring one room from the next, employing the light of our torches to subdue the dark shadows. The house really was falling apart, and was in appalling condition. The wooden floor beneath our feet creaked and groaned, and there were parts of it that were rotting and falling apart. I soon got used to the unsettling sound. We investigated every room, and even began to climb the crumbling staircase, which certainly was a risk. I was beginning to relax. I reassured myself that the paradoxical Bigfoot encounter that my father and his brother had experienced all those years ago in this very house would never happen to us. My brother was, of course, a perennial optimist in that regard. I was pretty sure he was going to lose interest in this ridiculous nightly mission, and soon we would be back home, slipping back into our warm beds and back into our comfortable lives. As I was thinking this, we heard a loud banging coming from the front door, even though most of it was missing. It was as if someone with powerful fists was slamming at it very aggressively. It made me jump out of my skin. The first words that came out of my mouth were, "What the hell?" My brother's eyes responded in kind, by widening, but I noticed that there was no fear in them. He looked absolutely thrilled, almost as if all his Christmases had come at once. "Oh my God!" he said. "It's Bigfoot! I know it is! It's Bigfoot! He's coming to scare us away! This is so cool! Brace yourself for an encounter!" At that quintessential moment, I could have slapped William across the face. I felt so annoyed with him. He was outrageously enthusiastic, rather like an athlete climbing a high building, getting extremely excited about the possibility that one slip-up and he could almost certainly fall to his death. I couldn't understand how my brother could be such a thrill-seeker like this. That was when what was left of the door was violently thrust open. I heard wood breaking, and there was nowhere to hide. So I just stood there, frozen to the spot, not knowing what to do or how to react. Then there she was, a very powerful female Bigfoot. Was I even seeing right, I wondered? This had to be a dream. It couldn't be real. But she was larger than life, and she was real, and she was standing there, very, very silently, looking at us through dark, earnest eyes. My brother thrust his torchlight directly into her face, which she didn't appreciate for a second, for the light appeared to annoy her, and she waved the torchlight away from her eyes, so that my brother quit shining the obtrusive light directly into her face. I could see my brother's eyes widened as he saw the Bigfoot, and I kid you not, there was a huge triumphant grin on his face. The female Bigfoot was so impressive in size and stature, so much so she almost took my breath away. She was gargantuan, with powerful overlong arms, extremely sturdy shoulders, and a robust physique that was completely rippled with muscle. She was so sturdy and so powerfully built like a rhino or bear, only she was so human-like and covered in long flowing dark hair. I began to tremble in my boots when I saw her dark, shadowy, ghost-like physique. But as my eyes adjusted to the light of her face, I took her all in. She was not remotely aggressive. Her face was so human, but earnest and rippled with concern. And then she spoke to us in an unorthodox language that I couldn't understand. But miraculously the words in my head began to be translated into English. Kilatika kwansi, han sokolo, masifani, likasintwa. You need to leave now. It's not safe in here. This place could explode. She began beckoning for us to leave, and then said, Kilatwansi, lutolopo. Don't come back here again, under any circumstances. The female Bigfoot was calm and firm in her words. She stood back for a moment, allowing us to pass her by. At this point I was so stunned, so overawed by her, I didn't know how to react. I could not fathom that this majestic Bigfoot was so emotionally intelligent, so wise. She had engaged in telepathic conversation with the both of us, and I couldn't believe this was happening. It almost felt as if we were caught up in a dream. It was so surreal. I could see William was caught up in the same mesmerized state that I was. He stared at the female Bigfoot with wide, appreciative eyes, as if he was trying to snap her memory, like a photograph in his head that he never ever wanted to forget. Kilakwi, hikasikwa, chikaso. You must leave now, said the Bigfoot. Don't come back. It's not safe. She watched us as we moved past her, running towards our bicycles, which we mounted, and then we began to cycle down the road. I glanced briefly over my shoulders to watch the female Bigfoot. She was just standing there, very stoically. She nodded at me as if to say goodbye. Everything about her was so gentle, so serene. There was nothing about her energy that made me feel remotely afraid, despite her huge size. In the nights that followed, the most extraordinary thing happened. Me and my brother would experience exactly the same dreams, where we were visited by the same female Bigfoot, telling us under no circumstance to go back to the Erickson house, as it wasn't safe. We compared notes, and our dreams were identical. We were both very overawed by our encounter, and never wanted to talk about it with anyone. It would seem that no matter whether you have a good or bad encounter with a Bigfoot, it certainly has a notable impact on your life. You would think you'd want to share your paradoxical experience with someone else, but we did not want to. I guess I understood then why my father had taken years to share his encounter with us. I did, of course, often wonder why the female Bigfoot we'd encountered had been so desperately determined for us to leave the Erickson house, so much so that she'd even entered our dreams to warn us about it. Little did I know that one day answers would actually be forthcoming, so much so that the puzzle pieces would finally come together and actually fit. Me and my brother had wisely chosen not to share with anyone what had happened to us on the night we'd slipped out of the house to go exploring the Erickson property. It had been my brother's rather vain, irrational hope that we would encounter a mob of angry Bigfoot, like my father and his brother had done. But instead we'd encountered the most beautiful female Bigfoot. And when I say beautiful, I mean that because she genuinely had the face of an angel. It's our secret, do you understand, Ernest? William said to me. No one must know what happened to us, not even Dad. For a start, he'd probably be angry if he knew we went to the abandoned Erickson house at the dead of night like we did. But also this experience was special. It happened to the both of us. It's very personal, so don't blab about it to anyone. I'm relying on you to keep this a secret. Are you worried that if we told people our story they wouldn't believe it? I asked my brother. No, absolutely not, said William, shaking his head. I don't actually care what other people think or believe. If they were to laugh at me, it would be no skin off my nose, and I wouldn't give a toss. That female Bigfoot was special. She was so kind, but very firm. She didn't chase us away aggressively, like the 4 Bigfoots chased Dad and Uncle Gareth away from the Ericksons' abandoned house. She was dignified in the way she told us to leave. She was graceful. But something is going on at the Erickson property, and I'd really like to know what it is. But I don't think we ever will know. But I guess those Bigfoots must have known something about the place, and I guess I'm going to have to be okay with that." "I understand perfectly," I told my brother, "only because, believe it or not, incongruously I feel exactly the same way. We won't talk about this again. My lips are sealed. But like you, I'm also profoundly curious as to what it is about the Erickson house that made the Bigfoots drive so many people away from it. I was wondering if perhaps the house is a portal of some kind that lets things into our reality, and Bigfoots don't want anyone going near it. I mean, I get the distinct impression Bigfoots appear to have an extrasensory perception and know things that we obviously don't. I also have the same impression of Bigfoot," my brother told me. "I've been thinking about this an awful lot. I genuinely believe those Bigfoots that scared the bejesus out of Uncle Gareth and Dad did not do so because they were being malevolent, but because they knew something wasn't right with the Erickson house. Maybe we'll never know what's going on there, but some mysteries remain unsolved, and this is probably going to be one of them." 2 years went by, and I learnt from my mother that the Erickson property was finally being sold and was soon to be bulldozed. One day when we were sitting at the breakfast table on a Saturday morning, and my mother was dishing up blueberry pancakes for us, which we were eating with a plethora of maple syrup and crispy bacon, my father had picked up the local paper, and I heard him say, "By Jove, I can't believe it." "What can't you believe?" asked my mother. "It's the old Erickson property," said my father. "What about it?" asked my mother. "Well, apparently they found an unexploded bomb in the house. Would you believe it? I believe it was very dangerous. It had the potential to go off at any time. I gather Tony Erickson, all those years ago, found it in a field and brought it back home, thinking it was a benign artifact. He placed it on his bureau in his bedroom, along with seashells, stones, and collections of arrowheads to put on display in his bedroom. He had no idea, of course, he'd brought home with him a very dangerous bomb that could potentially go off at any time. I mean, it looked harmless enough. I saw it myself, and I very much liked it. Thankfully, none of his collectible knickknacks were moved from the house when the furniture was taken, which is a relief, because if that thing had been manhandled for too long, it could have exploded and killed people, which is a dreadful thought." "But I don't understand," my mother asked. "How can someone not know a bomb is a bomb? Surely when you look at one, you know what it is." "Because, love, very often a bomb or a landmine can be looked on as something else, like a stone or a piece of concrete. All the time while the Ericksons were living in the house, they were living with a bomb in their midst that could have gone off. I can understand why a young boy would pick it up and consider it a treasurable collectible. He had no idea that he'd brought a dangerous bomb into the house. I cannot believe me and my brother Gareth were messing around in the place when a bomb could potentially have gone off. The paper is saying the expert is baffled that it didn't explode and go off a long time ago. They managed to secure it before they bulldozed the house." Me and my brother looked at each other in shocked surprise. We remembered the Bigfoot telling us it wasn't safe in the Erickson house and not to go back. I realized she must have picked up on the energy of the unexploded bomb, which may have been why a mob of Bigfoots had probably driven the Ericksons from their home, along with my father and my Uncle Gareth, who was still traumatized by the experience, not knowing, of course, that the Bigfoots had actually tried to help him. I realized the female Bigfoot we had encountered had led us away from danger, a crumbling ruin of a home that contained a deadly explosive. I have to say the Erickson property was finally bulldozed. A new house was erected in its place, and the new owners have lived there for many years and have not been chased away from the premises, which leads me to believe that the Bigfoots really did sense the danger that the bomb imposed, and as a consequence, they frightened everyone away from the Erickson property. So sometimes a dangerous Bigfoot may be being that way just to protect you. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.